Welcome back, traveler. Pull your cloak a little tighter, let your shoulders drop, and settle in somewhere warm. The fire is low tonight, just embers and a soft orange glow, and the snow outside is falling slow and quiet, the way it only ever falls in the far north. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything at all. Tonight we are going to wander together through the strangest, deepest, most unanswered corners of Skyrim. The questions no one has ever managed to settle. The things that sit just out of reach, half buried in ice and silence, waiting for someone to notice them. So let us begin where almost every great mystery in this land begins. Underground, in the dark, with the people who simply stopped existing. The vanishing of the Dwemer. There is a sound you learn to recognize after enough hours spent beneath Skyrim. A low mechanical breathing, deep and patient, somewhere far below your feet. Pistons turning in the gloom. Steam venting from old bronze lungs. Great gears, the size of houses, still grinding against one another in cities no living thing has called home for thousands of years. The machines are still running. The lamps are still lit. The doors still open at the press of a worn metal button. Centurions still patrol the old halls with slow, deliberate footsteps, defending rooms whose masters have been absent longer than most civilizations have existed. Only the people are gone. The Dwemer, the Deep Elves, the ones the Nords called dwarves even though they stood as tall as any other Mer, were perhaps the most brilliant civilization that ever rose on the face of this world. They were not dwarves in any sense you might picture. The name is a misunderstanding, a kind of joke that stuck, given to them by people who never quite understood what they were looking at. The Dwemer were engineers and philosophers and tonal sorcerers who treated the boundary between magic and machinery as something that simply did not apply to them. They built thinking metal. They built whole underground kingdoms, lit by artificial light. They built constructs that still walk their halls today, centurions and spheres and spiders, patrolling rooms whose masters have been gone for an entire age, faithful and tireless and completely alone. And then, in a single instant, every last one of the Dwemer disappeared from the world, and they have never come back, and to this very day, no one knows for certain where they went. Let me tell you what we actually know, because the truth is stranger than any rumor. It happened in the 700th year of the First Era, on the slopes of Red Mountain, in what is now the land of the Dark Elves. There was a war. The Chimer, the ancestors of the modern Dark Elves, were locked in a long and bitter conflict with the Dwemer over land and faith and old grievances that had festered for generations. But the real story was happening far beneath the battlefield, in the bowels of the mountain itself, where the Dwemer had discovered something that should never have been found. They had unearthed the heart of Lorkhan. Lorkhan, in the oldest stories, is the trickster spirit who convinced the gods to help build the mortal world, and who was punished terribly for it. His divine heart was torn out of him and cast down into the earth, and it came to rest beneath Red Mountain, and it has been beating there ever since. A literal piece of a dead god, humming with the raw stuff of creation itself, buried in the dark beneath a volcano. The chief engineer of the Dwemer, a figure named Kagranak, looked at that heart and saw an opportunity that no mortal had ever dared to imagine. He believed he could use it to make his entire people into gods, not to worship gods, to become them. He crafted 3 tools for the purpose, named Sunder, Keening, and Wraithguard, and with them he intended to bind the soul of the entire Dwemer race to the power of the heart and lift them all beyond death, beyond flesh, beyond the reach of anything that could ever threaten them. He even wrote of his philosophy, treating divinity not as a sacred mystery, but as a technical problem to be solved, a thing that could be engineered if you were only clever enough. And on that day, with the battle raging above and his king fallen in the caverns below, Kagranak struck the heart of Lorkhan with his tools. What happened next is the great question. The historian Vivek, who was supposedly present in those tunnels, described it simply. He said he watched Kagranak and all his Dwemer companions vanish from the world in the same heartbeat. Not flee, not fall, just vanish. And in that very instant, every Dwemer everywhere, across the whole of Tamriel, in every city and ruin and distant outpost, disappeared without a trace. Here is the detail that should settle cold in the back of your mind. When explorers finally entered the abandoned Dwemer halls in the centuries that followed, they did not find skeletons. They did not find barricades, or signs of struggle, or evidence of any evacuation at all. In some accounts, they found only fine gray dust, settled gently on the chairs where the Dwemer had been sitting, on the beds where they had been lying, beside the very tools they had been holding when it happened. Whatever it was, it happened so fast and so completely that they did not even have time to fall over. The world simply continued without them, while their machines kept turning in the dark, faithful and tireless, waiting for masters who would never come back. So, where did they go? This is where the verified history ends and theory begins, and I want to be careful here, because nobody can offer you the answer as a fact. Even the wisest scholars in this world disagree, and they have argued about it for thousands of years. Some believe the Dwemer succeeded, that Kagranak's ritual worked exactly as intended, and that they ascended into a higher state of being, leaving the mortal plane behind as easily as you might step through a doorway. Others believe the opposite, that the ritual went catastrophically wrong, that in trying to bind their souls to a god's heart, they unraveled their own existence and were scattered across time, or erased entirely, unmade from the inside out. A quieter and sadder theory holds that they were absorbed into the very metal of the great mechanical god Kagranak was trying to build, that the skin of that unfinished creation is made from the souls of an entire people. None of these can be proven. The Dwemer left us no answer, only the question, glowing faintly in the lamplight of their empty cities. But there is one piece of evidence that keeps the question alive, and it comes from much closer to home. There was, by every account we have, exactly one Dwemer who survived. His name was Yagrum Bogarn, and he survived for the most accidental reason imaginable. At the moment his entire race winked out of existence, Yagrum happened to be somewhere else entirely. He was lost, traveling in the outer realms, the strange and distant places beyond the ordinary world, and so the wave that took everyone else simply passed him by. He returned to find himself the last living member of his kind, alone in a silence no one else could ever truly understand. The last of the deep elves, with no one left to speak his language, wandering a world that had moved on without him. And then, thousands of years later, in Skyrim itself, someone tried to do it again. There is a mage at the College of Winterhold, a quiet and obsessive man named Arniel Gain, who became utterly fixated on the disappearance of the Dwemer. He acquired one of Kagranak's actual tools, the dagger called Keening. He prepared a substitute for the Heart of Lorcan using a soul gem, a tiny imitation of the real thing. And then, deep in the college, he attempted to recreate the exact circumstances of the day the Dwemer vanished. It worked. That is the terrifying part. It worked perfectly. Arniel Gain disappeared in front of the very people helping him, exactly the way Vivek described it happening to Kagranak. One moment there, the next moment simply gone. And here is the detail that will not leave you. After he vanished, his shade, his ghost, can be called to fight at your side, bound to you now, the way the Dwemer may have been bound to something far larger than themselves. And if you wander the halls of the college afterward, you can sometimes find that same shade drifting through the corridors, going about his old routine, apparently unaware that anything has happened to him, unaware that he has died, or transcended, or become whatever it is the Dwemer became. He just keeps walking, a little echo of a man, repeating the last steps of a life that ended without him noticing. Whatever happened to the Dwemer happened to him too, and we still cannot say what that was. So that is our first mystery. And before we travel any deeper, I want to pause and ask you something. Wherever you are right now, whatever the hour is where you have curled up to listen, leave a comment and tell me the time and the place you are hearing this from. I love reading them in the quiet hours. It makes this feel less like a recording and more like a fire we are all sitting around together, scattered across the world, but somehow in the same warm room. And if these stories help you drift off, consider subscribing so the next one finds you when you need it. No pressure, just settle back in. We have a long, peaceful night ahead of us, and there is so much more still buried in the dark. The bones in the mountain, far to the southeast of Skyrim, tucked into the cold spine of the Velothi Mountains near the border, there is a Dwemer ruin called Kagrenzel. Most travelers never find it. It does not sit beside any road. There is no village nearby, no signpost, nothing to draw you toward it, except a kind of pull you feel once you know it is there. And those who do find it tend to remember it for the rest of their lives because of what waits inside. When you first step into Kagrenzel, the place seems already broken. The city was clearly destroyed long ago, though by what no one can say. Near the entrance, you may come across the bodies of two would-be looters, bandits who reached this far and went no further. In the center of a dark chamber stands a plinth, and above it hovers a single orb of pale light. It is not aggressive. It does not attack. Instead, it turns slowly toward you, studying you the way a guardian might study a stranger at a gate. And then, when it has finished looking, the floor beneath your feet simply gives way. You fall. You fall a long, long way, down through the heart of the mountain, into the open dark. And it is during that fall, in the half-second before you hit the water below, that you see them. Bones. Enormous bones, far too large to belong to any creature you have ever fought in Skyrim. Set into the cavern walls, embedded in the stone, the great curving arc of a ribcage big enough to walk through, larger than a mammoth, larger than a dragon. The skeletal remains of something truly immense, something that matches no living animal anywhere in this world. What were they? I want to be honest with you, because this is one of those mysteries the game never solves on purpose. There is no book you can read, no character who will explain it. The official answer is that there is no official answer. The bones are simply there, vast and silent, glimpsed only in the moment you are falling past them and least able to study them. You cannot reach them. By the time you have picked yourself up at the bottom, they are far above you, out of sight, and the only thing left is the strange, unearthly rumbling that occasionally rolls through Kagranzel's foundations, deep and tonal, almost like a sound being made on purpose, somewhere far away. But there is a legend, and here I have to be clear, because this is where verified lore ends and apocryphal storytelling begins. The most beloved explanation for those bones comes not from inside the games at all, but from old unofficial writings attributed to one of the series' early creative voices, the kind of text-devoted fans treasure but that has never been confirmed as literal truth. And that legend speaks of snow whales. According to this folklore, in the deep mythic past, before the world had settled into its current shape, enormous whales lived not in the sea, but at the summits of the highest mountains. They were said to sing in magical tones, to drift through the cold air above the peaks, and to spread what the old story calls their joy snow in a kind of triumphant, horn-like song, flying whales singing on the rooftop of the world. It is the sort of image that sounds absurd in daylight and perfectly believable at this hour of the night, when the line between the possible and the impossible goes soft. If that story holds any truth, the bones in Kagrenzel take on a chilling new meaning. Remember what the Dwemer were: tonal architects, engineers of sound who understood that the universe itself might be made of vibration and resonance, and that by finding the right frequencies, you could reshape matter and generate power. They did not build their machines with hammer and heat. They built with tone, with resonance, with the music hidden inside things. And remember the name of the ruin. In the Dwemer tongue, Kagrenzel has been understood by some scholars to mean something close to a city of music, or a falling tone, a place dedicated to that very art. So picture it. A people obsessed with the music hidden inside reality, who discover a creature whose entire body is a living instrument, a beast that sings in tones strong enough to part clouds and call snow. What would the Dwemer do with such a thing? They would study it. They would take it apart. They might have hunted these singing giants and dragged their bones into the mountain to learn the secret of their voices, to capture that resonance and bend it to their machines and experiments. And the rumbling that still shakes Kagrenzel's foundations today might be the lingering echo of those experiments, tones set in motion so long ago that they have simply never stopped, still ringing faintly through the stone to an empty room. The notion that, somewhere under the mountains, a song started long ago and is still playing, very faintly, to no one at all. I find that idea very hard to let go of. Now, there are other theories. Some believe the bones belong to no whale at all, but to some ordinary prehistoric creature, a thing that simply lived and died in an age before record. Some have wondered whether the deepest reaches of Kagrenzel were meant to hide something far larger and more dangerous, and that the orb and the trapdoor were never security against thieves, but a test, a way of weeding out the unworthy before they reached whatever the Dwemer were guarding down there. A few stubborn dreamers point out how close Kagrenzel sits to other sites of immense ancient significance, and wonder whether the bones might be a fragment of something divine, the remains of a being far older and stranger than any whale. The honest truth is, we will probably never know. The Dwemer took the answer with them when they vanished, and all they left us was the question, hanging in the cold air of a falling chamber, glimpsed for half a heartbeat, and then gone. Bones in the dark, too big to be real, singing a song we cannot quite hear. Let that one settle as you breathe. There is no danger here. Just an old, quiet wonder, the kind that does no harm to carry gently into sleep. The buried sun. Now let us go down to the deepest, strangest, most impossible place in all of Skyrim. Let us go to Blackreach. To reach it, you have to descend through the Dwemer ruins, down past the rusted gates and the patient machines, down through tunnels that grow colder and quieter the further you go. And then the passage opens, and you step out into a space that should not be there. Because Blackreach is not a cave. Blackreach is a world. It is a cavern so vast that you cannot see the far walls of it. The ceiling arches hundreds of feet up, lost in shadow, and from that ceiling hang colossal stalactites and the broken ruins of Dwemer towers. Clustered everywhere, on the ground and clinging to the rocks, are glowing mushrooms that cast a soft blue and gold light across everything, a gentle, perpetual twilight, so that the whole enormous space glows faintly from within, like the inside of a held breath. There is water down here, still black pools that reflect the false light. There are ancient roads, there are buildings the size of cities, and hanging above it all, suspended in the dark like a small captured star, there is a sun. Not the real sun, an artificial one, a great glowing orb the Dwemer hung in the center of their underground kingdom to light the place they were not content to leave dark. It floats there still, silent and steady, casting its strange light across the ruins of the people who made it and then disappeared. The first and most obvious mystery of Blackreach is simply this: how can it possibly exist? The cavern is so large it defies the very mountains it sits beneath. There does not seem to be enough room inside the earth for a space this big, and yet here it is, complete with its own ecosystem, its own quiet weather of drifting spores, its own light. Did the Dwemer find a natural void of unimaginable scale and simply move into it? Or, far more unsettling, did they create the space themselves, hollowing out the bones of the world with their tonal machinery until they had carved an entire country out of solid rock? We do not know. The scale of it makes either answer hard to believe, which is precisely why it sits so heavily in the imagination. The deeper you look into Blackreach's history, the more layers you uncover, and each one is older and stranger than the last, because the Dwemer were not the first to live here. According to the lore, long before the Deep Elves arrived, Blackreach was settled by the very first vampire clans, in the same shadowed age when the world was young. They built kingdoms in its depths, and one clan in particular, in some accounts, did not feed on blood at all. They sustained their unnatural lives on the power of a dark and ancient artifact, a thing older than they were. When the Dwemer came, they took that artifact for themselves and studied it, draining much of its power. So, beneath the Dwemer ruins lie the ruins of something even more ancient, vampire halls predating the engineers who built over them, predating almost everything we have a name for. Then came the Dwemer themselves, and Blackreach became the great underground highway of their civilization. And here, in their deepest minds, they found the thing that would eventually tear them apart. A rare and luminous blue crystal, humming with raw magic. They called it Ethereum. It was unlike anything else in the world. It could not be melted by ordinary means, could not be shaped, could not be enchanted, could not even be safely stored indoors because it was harmonically volatile. To work it at all, they had to build a special forge set deep below the surface and powered by magma, capable of smelting the crystal under conditions so precise that nothing else could replicate them. What they made in that forge were artifacts of staggering power, and 4 of their great cities formed an alliance to control the crystal. For a while it worked, and then the alliance turned upon itself. Each city wanted the forge and the power for itself alone, and the cooperation curdled into a long and bitter conflict the histories call the Ethereum Wars, a civil war among the Deep Elves that left their underground civilization broken from within. By the time the rest of the world came knocking, the cities of the Dwemer had already been bleeding one another dry in the dark, so Blackreach is not one mystery. It is a stack of them, each buried beneath the next. The impossible cavern. The vanished vampire kings. The crystal that no one can fully explain. The civilization that warred with itself over something perhaps never meant to be dug up. And it is still, even now, far from empty. The blinded, twisted descendants of the snow elves haunt its passages. Glowing fungus that grows nowhere else in the world clusters in its corners. A unique red plant, crimson nirnroot, grows here and nowhere else in all of Skyrim. So rare that a famous scholar spent the end of his life trying to understand it. And somewhere in the gloom, beneath that hanging false sun, there is a dragon. His name is Vulthuriol, and he is one of the quiet riddles of this place. A creature of the open sky somehow trapped beneath the entire weight of Skyrim's mountains, in a place where there is no sky to fly through. How did he get there? Why does he stay? What is his connection to the Dwemer who built the cavern around him? The lore does not say. None of it is explained. And the way you summon him only deepens the strangeness, because to call him out of hiding, you must stand in the silent ruins beneath that false sun and raise your voice in the dragon tongue against the orb itself. Only then does he descend out of the gloom to face you. For now, just let yourself stand in Blackreach a moment longer, in the soft glow of the mushrooms and the false starlight, in a place too large to be real, built by a people who no longer exist, over the bones of people older still. It is one of the most peaceful places to simply be, in its own eerie way, precisely because nothing here will ever change. The light does not dim, the ruins do not crumble any further. It simply waits and glows and keeps its secrets, patient as the dust. The betrayed. There is a sound in the Dwemer ruins that you learn to fear, and it is not the grinding of the machines. It is a clicking, chittering, scrabbling sound somewhere ahead in the dark, and the quick tapping of feet that move too low to the ground. When you hear it, you know the Falmer are near. They are nightmarish things to fight. Hunched and pale and sightless, their skin stretched gray over bodies that have forgotten what they were supposed to look like. They swarm out of the shadows in crude armor of chitin and bone, and they do not need eyes to find you. They hear everything. They have made their homes in the abandoned cities of the deep elves and in the deepest reaches of Blackreach, breeding their insect herds, building their twisted hovels, hating the surface world with a fury that has no words. To most travelers, they are simply monsters, obstacles on the way to the treasure. But the Falmer were not always monsters, and their true story is, I think, the single saddest thing in all of Skyrim. Once, they were called the Snow Elves, and they were beautiful. In the time before men came to this land, in the deep Merethic era, the Snow Elves ruled Skyrim. They built a civilization of grace and learning and tremendous magical skill, a society that rivaled even the high elves of the distant southern isles. They lived in the sunlight. They raised temples and chantries to their god of light, and they walked the snow as its rightful keepers, proud and accomplished, and entirely unaware of what was coming for them. What came for them was us, humanity. When the Atmaran settlers came across the cold sea and began to spread through Skyrim, the two peoples could not share the land. There was a massacre, a terrible night of slaughter, and in the war that followed, a great Nord hero returned with an army and broke the Snow Elves utterly. Their finest champion, the Snow Prince, fell in battle, and with him fell the heart of their resistance. Defeated, dwindling, facing the real prospect of extinction, the surviving Snow Elves did the only thing they could think to do. They turned to their underground cousins, the Dwemer, and begged for shelter. After all, there were old legends among the Snow Elves that spoke of the honor and glory of the Deep Elves. Surely kin would protect kin, and the Dwemer agreed. But the Deep Elves did not trust their frightened refugees. They were a proud and insular people, suspicious of anything that was not Dwemer, and they could not abide having a foreign population living in their halls with the freedom to rise up or flee. So they made a condition, a price for sanctuary. And the price was sight. The Dwemer fed the Snow Elves a fungus that grew in the deep caverns, a toxic thing that, taken over time, slowly and permanently blinded them. This was not an accident. It was not a side effect. It was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty designed to make their guests utterly helpless, utterly dependent, unable ever again to look upon their masters as equals. And the worst of it, the part that turns the stomach, is that the Dwemer made the fungus a permanent part of the Falmer diet. They ensured that not only the elves who took shelter that day would be blind, but their children and their children's children, every generation thereafter, born into darkness because of a bargain their ancestors made in desperation. The snow elves, for all of time, would never see again. So they became servants, and then they became slaves. And then, slowly, across uncounted generations underground, suffering and toiling and breeding in the dark, they began to change. Their bodies bent. Their ears and noses grew strange and pronounced, perhaps to compensate for eyes that no longer worked. They lost their language, their art, their memory of the sun. They became less and less like the proud elves they had been, and more like the feral savage creatures you fight in the ruins today. The snow elves who survived call this transformation by a single, heartbreaking name. They call those who suffered it the betrayed. And here is a genuine mystery the lore deliberately leaves open. We know the fungus blinded them. That much is told plainly. But what twisted them so completely, what reduced a sophisticated, magical, beautiful people into the hunched and bestial Falmer of the present day, that is not fully explained. Was it the poison itself, working its corruption deeper over the centuries? Was it the endless torture and abuse of slavery? Was it simply the brutal arithmetic of adapting, generation after generation, to a world without light, without hope, without anything to live for but survival? Or was it something else entirely, something deeper, that we have never once been told? The scholars argue, the lore stays silent, the Falmer cannot tell us, because the Falmer no longer remember that there is anything to tell. Eventually, they rebelled. As slaves so often do, the Falmer rose against their masters, and a long, bloody underground conflict began, the War of the Crag, fought in the lightless reaches of Blackreach. It raged for decade upon decade. And it ended not in victory or defeat, but in absence, because when the Dwemer vanished from the world in that single instant beneath Red Mountain, the Falmer found they had no enemy left to fight. They had won the war by default, inheriting the empty ruins of the people who had ruined them. But not every snow elf took the Dwemer's poison bargain, and this is where, against all odds, a thread of the old beauty survives. Hidden behind a frozen cave and a forgotten path, there is a place called the Forgotten Vale. A valley sealed away from time, with frozen waterfalls hanging in great curtains of ice, ancient, elegant architecture of impossible grace, and a stillness so complete it feels like stepping into a held memory. This was a sacred space of the snow elves, the home of their great chantry, dedicated to the god of light. And here, a tiny handful survived, untouched by the fungus, never enslaved, because they heard of the plan to seek refuge with the Dwemer, too late to take any part in it. You can actually meet one. His name is Knight Paladin Gelibor, and he is the last of his kind that anyone knows of. A true snow elf, ancient and dignified and unbearably alone. He has watched his entire civilization fall and rot and twist into the monsters that now haunt the deep. And when he speaks of the Falmer, the savage things in the ruins, he does not call them Falmer. He refuses that word. He calls them his primal brethren. He calls them the betrayed. And there is a sorrow in it that goes deeper than any battle, because he remembers what they were. He remembers the sunlight and the cities and the songs. He is the only one left who does. Even the veil itself carries a darker wound, because Gelibor's own brother, who once guarded that sacred place, fell to vampirism long ago and turned against everything they had both held holy. So the final sanctuary of the snow elves became a place of fratricide and ruin, beautiful and poisoned at once, its frozen halls echoing with a grief that has nowhere left to go. That is the tragedy of the snow elves. They went into the dark to survive, and survival cost them their eyes, their minds, their souls, and their very shape. And somewhere in Blackreach tonight, the descendants of a people who once walked freely in the sun are scrabbling through the gloom, hating a light they can no longer see and have entirely forgotten that they were ever anything else at all. Breathe slow. Let the sadness of it pass over you gently. There is nothing to fix here, nothing to carry, only an old story, told quietly, the way the truly tragic ones should always be told. The eye beneath the ice. Let us go to the College of Winterhold, perched on its lonely spire of rock above the freezing northern sea, and let us talk about the thing they found beneath the ice. Because the central mystery of the college, the one that nearly tears the world apart, begins with a single object dug out of an ancient ruin, an object that no one, not the wisest mages in existence, can fully explain. The Eye of Magnus. The story starts in a place called Sarthal, one of the very first cities humanity ever built in Skyrim. When the Atmaran settlers came over the sea, led by the great hero whose name you will hear again on this journey, they raised Sarthal as one of their earliest strongholds, the cradle of human civilization in the north. And while they were building it, deep in the ground beneath their new city, they found something buried, something old. They did not understand what it was, and the not understanding frightened them because their instinct was to bury it again, to keep it hidden, to keep it down in the dark where they had found it, and never speak of it. But the snow elves learned of it, and the snow elves wanted it. This brings us to one of the foundational catastrophes of Skyrim's history, the Night of Tears. The snow elves attacked Sarthal and slaughtered its people in a massacre so complete it has echoed through every century since. For a long time, the simple story was that the elves struck out of fear of the growing human population. But the deeper lore suggests something far more specific. The elves did not attack Sarthal at random. They attacked it because of what was buried beneath it. They knew about the Eye, and whatever it was, they could not allow humanity to possess it. The massacre had a consequence the elves did not foresee. A survivor carried word back across the sea, and the great Nord hero returned with 500 companions and swept the snow elves from Skyrim in a campaign of vengeance. When it was over, the humans took the Eye and buried it once more, deep beneath Sarthal, and there it slept for thousands of years, forgotten by almost everyone, until the college came digging. So what is it? This is the heart of the mystery, and the truth is that nobody knows, and the story is built around the fact that nobody knows. The Eye of Magnus is described as a massive orb, around 10 feet across, an object of such immense and unstable magical power that mishandled it has the potential to unmake the world entirely. It is covered in a script related to the writing found on the Elder Scrolls themselves, those impossible artifacts that record past and future and can drive a mortal mind to ruin merely by being read. Some accounts suggest the Eye may have crashed into the world from somewhere else entirely, like a meteor falling from the heavens in the ages, before any recorded time. It is, in the words of those who have studied it, a distant and mysterious object, and that vague phrase is about as close to a definition as anyone has ever managed. There are theories, and you deserve to hear them, though I will mark them clearly as theories. The most popular ties the Eye to the god whose name it bears. Magnus, the god of magic, the great architect, a being we will talk about in depth very shortly. Some believe the Eye is a piece of him, a fragment shed during the creation of the world, a scale of divinity left behind. The fact that it answers to the staff of Magnus, an artifact that genuinely did belong to that god, gives the idea real weight. Others believe it is older than any god we have a name for, a relic from a previous version of the universe, a fragment of a reality that existed and ended before our own world began. And others still suspect it is simply a thing without category, a piece of raw creative power that does not fit any school of magic or any pantheon, because it predates the very rules those things are built upon. What we do know is what it can do, and that is frightening enough. During the events at the college, a Thalmor agent named Ankano draws on the Eye's power, and the moment he does, reality itself begins to come apart around him. The air warps. The world strains at its seams. It becomes immediately, horribly clear that this object is not a tool or a weapon in any normal sense. It is closer to a wound in the fabric of things, a place where the ordinary laws stop applying. Because here is the detail that elevates the whole affair into a genuine cosmic mystery. The Eye is so dangerous that beings who almost never involve themselves in mortal affairs decide they have no choice but to step in. An ancient order of mages, the oldest magical society in the world, appears at the college specifically because of the Eye. They are powerful beyond anything the college's greatest masters can imagine, able to freeze time itself and walk through the stopped moments as casually as you might cross a room, and their judgment is absolute. The Eye is too dangerous to be studied, too dangerous to be kept, too dangerous to exist within reach of mortal hands. So, they take it. They remove the Eye of Magnus from the world entirely, sealing it away somewhere beyond mortal access, offering no explanation of what it was or where it is going, and so the great riddle is never solved. It is deliberately and permanently put out of reach. We are left exactly where the Atmaran settlers were when they first dug it up, holding something we do not understand, frightened of it, certain only that it should stay buried. The Eye of Magnus is gone now, hidden away by beings who decided we were not ready to know it, and the question of what it truly was rests down there with it, in the dark, where it has always lived. There is a strange comfort in it, isn't there? The idea that some things are simply too large to be understood, and that the wisest choice is sometimes to simply let them sleep. Holes in the sky. I want to take you somewhere you can see from almost anywhere in Skyrim. From the deepest cavern, if you climb back to the surface. From the highest peak. From the door of any little house, in any little village. Look up on a clear night, and there it is, the sky full of stars. And here is something almost no one stops to consider. Something the people of this world believe with complete sincerity, though it would sound like madness to anyone from somewhere else. To the old cultures of Skyrim, the stars are not distant suns. They are not balls of fire impossibly far away. They are holes, tears in the fabric of the sky, and the light that pours through them is not the light of other worlds. It is something leaking in from outside reality entirely. To understand why they believe this, we have to go back to the very beginning of everything, to the creation of the world itself, and to the god whose name we just heard, whispered beneath Sarthal, Magnus. In the oldest cosmology, before there was a mortal world at all, there were only the original spirits drifting in the formless place where things begin. And the trickster Lorcan went among them with an idea. He convinced a number of these spirits to come together and build something new, a mortal plane, a world with rules, with time, with death. And one of the spirits he convinced was Magnus, who was perhaps the most brilliant of them all, and who became the architect of the entire project. Magnus drew up the plans. He designed the schematics and diagrams, the very blueprint of the world. The structure of reality itself was his design. But there was a catch Lorcan had not been entirely honest about. To build a mortal world, the spirits would have to pour their own divine power into it. They would have to sacrifice their boundless eternal natures to give the world its laws. As the work went on, the spirits began to realize with growing horror that they were dying. Their power was draining away. Some faded out of existence entirely, used up, spent, gone. The cost of creation was their own immortality. And Magnus, the architect, looked at what was happening to his fellow gods and made a decision. He would not pay that price. He abandoned the project. He fled. In the final agonies of the world's birth, Magnus tore himself free of the mortal plane and escaped back to the realm of pure magic and pure spirit beyond it, the place called Aetherius. And his escape was so violent, so absolute, that it ripped a hole in the newborn sky, a great wound in the fabric of reality, through which he passed on his way out. That hole is the sun. When you look up at the sun in the cosmology of this world, you are looking at the scar Magnus left when he fled creation rather than die for it. The largest hole in the sky, the doorway a god used to escape his own unfinished work. And he was not alone. Other spirits, seeing his choice, decided to follow. They too fled for the safety of Aetherius beyond, and each one tore a smaller hole as they passed through. These followers became known as the Magna Go, and the holes they left behind are the stars. Every single point of light in the night sky is the escape route of a god who decided the mortal world was not worth dying for. The light you see is the raw magic of Aetherius, bleeding through from beyond, leaking into the world through the punctures left by deities in flight. Think about what that means for a moment, in the quiet. Every clear night, when you lie back and look up at all those gentle, peaceful stars, you are looking at evidence of abandonment, a sky full of the doors the gods used to leave. And the soft light that has comforted travelers and lovers and frightened children since the beginning of time is, in this telling, the glow of a divine realm shining through the cracks where creation was wounded at its birth. And more than that, the magic that mages draw on to cast their spells, the very stuff of sorcery, flows into the world through those same stellar holes. The stars are not merely beautiful, they are the source of magic itself, leaking in from a place the gods escaped to and never returned from. Now, there is a thread tying the cosmic to the personal here, and it is a small and elegant one. We talked about vampires lurking in the deep places of Blackreach. We know vampires fear the sun. They burn in daylight, weaken beneath the open sky, hide themselves in dark castles and deeper caves. The obvious assumption is that bright illumination harms them. But that is not quite right, and the truth is far more interesting. Vampires are not harmed by light in general. They are harmed specifically by sunlight. And the reason, according to the deeper lore, is theological. There is a version of the god of light, an elven sun god closely tied to Magnus himself, who is said to have blessed the sun against the undead, sanctified it, made its light specifically holy and specifically hostile to the things that cheat death and refuse to lie down. So when sunlight falls on a vampire and burns it, what is burning it is not heat, and it is not brightness. It is a divine blessing, carried on the light that pours through Magnus's hole in the sky, anti-undead by sacred design. There is even an ancient weapon recovered in the events around the Forgotten Vale that proves the point. With one kind of arrow, it can blot out the sun, plunging the land into sudden darkness. With another, it can charge that sunlight to even greater holy power, turning the blessing directly into a weapon against the undead. If the sun were merely light, none of that would make any sense. But the sun is not merely light. It is a wound left by a fleeing god, and it carries a blessing in its glow, and that is precisely why the creatures of the night cannot bear to stand beneath it. So the next time you watch the sun rise over the mountains, remember what you are watching: a god's escape route, glowing with borrowed holiness, opening the day and driving the darkness back underground. The light is a door, and the door is kind to the living and cruel to the dead, and it has been that way since the first morning of the world, the rider without a head. Let us come back down out of the heavens now, back to the ordinary roads of Skyrim, the dirt tracks winding between the holds, and let us talk about something you will only ever meet at night, something that does not threaten you, does not attack you, does not want anything from you at all, and is, for exactly that reason, one of the most unsettling sights in the entire province: the Headless Horseman. He comes only in the deep hours, somewhere between the late night and the cold edge of dawn. You will be traveling a lonely road, the moon's high overhead, your breath fogging in the chill, and then you will see him ahead of you, or off to the side, mounted on a spectral horse that leaves a faint, smoky blue trail behind it as it moves. The rider sits tall in the saddle, armored, carrying a great battle axe across his back, and where his head should be, there is nothing, just the empty collar of his armor and the night beyond it. He does not turn toward you. He does not raise his weapon. He simply rides, with grim and silent purpose, always in the same direction, always toward the same place. If you try to strike him, your blade passes through him as though he were made of smoke, because he is a ghost, and the world has marked him as something that cannot be touched or harmed or stopped. Now and then, if you ride alongside him for a while, he will speak. A few low words, vague warnings about disturbing his rest, telling you that you are not welcome here, that you should leave him be. And then he rides on, ignoring you, intent on his destination as though you had never been there at all. And if you follow him, if you keep pace with that ghostly horse through the dark for mile after mile, he will lead you eventually to a small and unremarkable Nordic tomb called Hamvir's Rest. There, at the entrance to the old burial ground, the Headless Horseman stops. And then he simply vanishes, his nightly ride complete, his long journey home finished once again, as it has been finished countless times before, and will be again the next night, and the night after that, forever. Who was he? This is the mystery, and what makes it such a perfect one is how little the world gives you to work with. There is no quest attached to the Headless Horseman, no journal entry, no book, no character anywhere who knows his name. He is not part of any story you can complete or any reward you can claim. He is simply there, a piece of pure atmosphere given flesh, an unscripted haunting that exists for no reason the game will ever explain. At Hamvir's Rest, where his ride ends, you find a few faint clues, but they only deepen the riddle rather than solve it. There is the tomb itself, with its handful of restless dead. There is a word wall carved with ancient knowledge, marking the place as a battlefield of some old and forgotten significance. And there is, in that cold little graveyard, a single coffin set apart from the others, and beside it, sitting alone on the stone, a lone skull and a helmet. As if the body of the headless horseman lies right there, and his missing head was set down beside him, and every night some restless fragment of him rises and rides the long road home, only to dissolve at the threshold of the grave he can never quite bring himself to enter. There is no gravestone with a name, there is no inscription. The clues gesture at a story without ever once telling it. So the people of this world, and the travelers who have followed that ghostly rider through the dark, have spun their own theory, and I will share it with you as exactly that, a theory, a beautiful guess, and nothing more. There is an old song that the bards of Skyrim sing in every tavern, a cheerful little tune about a warrior named Ragnar the Red. In the song, Ragnar comes riding into a town, all boasts and bluster, and he meets his end at the edge of a blade, his head struck clean from his shoulders for his arrogance. He was a warrior. He rode. He lost his head. He haunted the same general hold where the horseman haunts. And so some have wondered whether the silent rider on the spectral horse might be Ragnar himself, condemned to ride the roads forever, carrying the consequence of that old tavern song through all of eternity. It fits. In the loose and pleasing way these things tend to fit. A headless warrior on horseback, haunting the very land where the song is set. But it is a guess. The song never names Hamvir's Rest. Nothing truly connects them except the shape of the story. It could be Ragnar, it could be anyone. It could be no one at all, just a ghost the land made up to keep its lonely roads from feeling too empty at night. There is one more detail, and it is the kind of small, strange truth that lives at the seam between the story and the way the story was made. Though the horseman's head appears to be missing entirely, in the hidden bones of the game itself, the head is still there. It is simply invisible, and beneath that invisibility, it wears the same face as a minor figure who appears elsewhere in the world. A borrowed face hidden inside a headless ghost. It changes nothing about the mystery, and yet it adds a faint extra shiver to it, the sense that even the people who built this rider did not quite give him an identity of his own. He is, in the most literal possible way, a man with a borrowed and hidden face, riding forever toward a grave with no name on it. And maybe that is entirely the point. Maybe the headless horseman is meant to stay a mystery forever. The lore around him is so deliberately, so completely empty, that it almost has to be on purpose, a reminder that this world is not built solely around you and your great destiny, that there are things in it with their own quiet sorrows and their own endless errands, things that were here long before you came and will still be here long after you go, riding the dark roads under the moons, whether anyone follows them or not. Not everything needs an explanation. Some ghosts simply ride, and some questions are far more peaceful left unanswered, and the headless rider going home to his nameless grave is, in its own gentle way, one of the kindest hauntings you will ever witness. Let him ride on into the dark. He means you no harm. He never has, and he never will. The key that holds the door. There is a guild of thieves in Skyrim, and in the years before your arrival, they had fallen on the very hardest of times. Once they had ruled the shadows of the whole province, with safe houses in every city and influence reaching into the courts of the powerful and the beds of the wealthy. By the time you find them, they have been reduced to a single damp hideout in the sewers beneath the city of Riften, a handful of bitter, struggling rogues clinging to the memory of what they used to be. Every job goes wrong. Every plan falls apart. Their luck, they say, has simply run dry. And here is the mystery at the center of it all, the strange and quiet truth that the thieves themselves only half understand. Their luck did not run dry by accident. It ran dry because someone stole a key. Not an ordinary key, the skeleton key. And to understand the skeleton key, you have to understand the bargain the Thieves Guild made long ago with one of the dark gods. Her name is Nocturnal, and she is the patron of every thief in all of the world, the mistress of night and darkness and, above all, of luck. She is not a god who wants worship or temples or prayers shouted in the street. She is far subtler than that. What she trades in is fortune itself, the unseen tilt of chance that decides whether the lock opens on the first try or the guard turns his head at exactly the wrong moment. Generations ago, the Thieves Guild made a pact with her. A small devoted order within the guild, called the Nightingales, swore to serve her, in life and in death, as the guardians of her shrine. And in exchange, Nocturnal tipped the odds. She let her luck seep quietly into the world on their behalf, that thin, invisible advantage that turned the impossible job into the merely difficult one, and the merely difficult one into something close to routine. The conduit for all of that luck, the doorway through which it flowed into the world, was an object called the skeleton key. Now, the skeleton key is famous among thieves for one obvious reason. It is a lockpick that never breaks, an unbreakable tool that can open any lock ever made in the hands of the right thief. But that turns out to be only its surface function, the least of the things it can do. Its true purpose is far stranger and far more important. The skeleton key unlocks all things, not just doors and chests and vaults, but possibilities, potential, the hidden capacities locked inside a person or a moment or the world itself. And its deepest function of all is this. It holds open a portal deep in the woods of Falkreath Hold, in an ancient and crumbling temple called the Twilight Sepulchre. There is a well of pure darkness called the Ebonmere, and the Ebonmere is the doorway through which Nocturnal's luck pours into the world. The skeleton key is what keeps that doorway open. It is the thing that holds the door, the pin in the lock, that lets fortune flow from the realm of the goddess of night into the realm of mortals who steal things. Without the key in its rightful place, the Ebonmere shuts. And without the Ebonmere open, the luck drains away, slowly and then all at once, until the thieves who depended on it cannot seem to do anything right, which is exactly what happened. A corrupt and deeply ambitious thief named Mercer Frey, who held one of the highest positions in the guild, betrayed his oath and stole the skeleton key from its resting place in the Twilight Sepulchre. He did not merely steal a very good lockpick, he pulled the key out of the lock. He shut the door. He cut the Thieves' Guild off from the very source of their fortune, and from that moment, their luck began to drain away, slowly at first, and then completely, until they were reduced to that single damp sewer hideout, wondering what had gone so wrong, unable to understand why every plan they made seemed to come apart in their hands. And Mercer did use the power of the key for himself. With the skeleton key in his possession, he could unlock things no ordinary thief could ever touch. He grew strong and arrogant and seemingly untouchable, until at last he was hunted down in the depths of an old Dwemer ruin, beneath a colossal statue whose eyes were carved from the legendary gems of the long-lost snow elves, and there he was finally brought to account. But here is the part of this mystery that lingers longest, the part that turns a simple tale of theft and betrayal into something genuinely strange. When the key is recovered, you are not meant to keep it. You are meant to carry it back through the dark woods to the Twilight Sepulchre, to walk the long pilgrim's path through that trial-filled ancient temple, and to return the skeleton key to its rightful place in the Ebonmere, restoring the flow of luck to the guild and to the world. And when you do, when you set the key back into the lock and the well of darkness opens once more, Nocturnal herself appears to speak with you. And what she says is one of the quietest and most unsettling little moments in all of Skyrim. She remarks, almost idly, that it has been a number of years since she last set foot in your world. Or perhaps, she says, it has only been moments. She tends to lose track. Sit with that for a moment. A god, standing before you, who genuinely cannot tell whether years or seconds have passed since she was last here, because time in her realm beyond the world simply does not run the way it does for you and me. To her, the whole long fall of the Thieves' Guild, the theft of the key, the years of ruined luck, the betrayal and the hunting and the death of Mercer Frey, all of it may have been a single careless moment in which she happened to look away. And there is a stranger truth buried even deeper than that. By some accounts, Nocturnal actually allows the skeleton key to be stolen and lost from time to time, whether out of some unknowable purpose of her own, or simply out of a kind of divine indifference, a cosmic carelessness about the small struggles of the mortals who serve her. The thieves break themselves trying to recover what they lost. They walk through trials and face death and betrayal to set things right. And the goddess they serve may have simply allowed it to happen, and may not have noticed the whole ordeal at all. The skeleton key has gone missing before, in ages past, and it will likely go missing again, and the wheel of luck and loss will turn once more, while Nocturnal watches from her realm of endless twilight, losing track of the years, holding the only door that really matters, and caring, perhaps, only as much as a god of luck ever genuinely bothers to care about the fortunes of the small. There is something almost soothing in that, in the end. The idea that fortune itself flows from a hidden door in a dark wood, and that somewhere a small and devoted order of thieves works quietly to keep that door open, even when no one alive remembers their names or knows the debt the world owes them for their service. The tree that fell from nowhere. To the west of Whiterun, out on the open tundra where the grass goes gold and the mammoths drift slowly across the plain, there is a giant camp like any other, and in the middle of it, there is a tree like no other in all the world. You will see the glow before you see anything else. A soft, sickly purple light rising up from a small, misty pool, and standing in the center of that pool, a tree unlike any oak or pine or birch that grows anywhere else in Skyrim. Its trunk is strange and pale. Its whole form pulses faintly with that violet light, and the water around its roots drifts with a low, cold mist, the same unhealthy color. The giants who camp here guard it, though they do not seem to worship it exactly, and the few who have braved their wrath to approach it have found that the tree can be tapped, like a maple, for its sap. And the sap is where things get truly peculiar. Drink it, and for a short time you feel tremendous, flooded with vitality, your body surging with health and strength. But your vision goes strange, washed all in purple, and your movements slow, and the world takes on a dreamy narcotic haze that is honestly a little difficult to describe. It is, in plain terms, a drug, a powerful one, so powerful and so valuable that there is a quiet little smuggling operation built around it. A merchant in Whiterun who hires others to make the dangerous trip out to the camp and harvest the sap, then sells it on to the traveling Khajiit caravans, who pay very handsomely for it indeed. A respectable face on a trade in something genuinely intoxicating, harvested from a tree that, by every right, should not exist at all, because that is the mystery. Where did this tree come from? It matches nothing native to Skyrim. It does not belong to this land, or this climate, or perhaps even this world, and the lore offers you two competing stories about its origin, told by that same Whiterun merchant if you ask her, two explanations that have never been reconciled and that sit in permanent, unresolved tension. The first story is volcanic. Far to the east, in the land of the Dark Elves, the great volcano Red Mountain erupted catastrophically in the early years of the current age. An eruption so violent it devastated an entire province and reshaped the very map of the world. They call it the Red Year. And one story holds that when the mountain blew, it hurled a piece of itself clear across the sea and into the heart of Skyrim, a chunk of burning rock that crashed down onto the tundra west of Whiterun and gouged out a crater, and that from that crater, fed by who knows what alien material brought from the heart of a dying volcano, this strange purple tree grew, a seed of disaster, carried on the force of a mountain's death, taking root in foreign soil, hundreds of miles from where it began. The second story is stranger, and to me far more haunting. It holds that the tree did not come from across the sea at all, but from above it. That a spore fell from a floating island in the sky, and that this tree grew from that spore, which would make it something very specific and very significant. It would make it one of the Hist. Now, I have to explain the Hist to you, because if this second story is true, the little purple tree on the Whiterun tundra is far more than a curiosity. The Hist are the great sentient trees of the distant marshlands far to the south, the homeland of the lizard folk, the Argonians. And the Hist are not trees in any way you would normally understand the word. They are ancient beyond all reckoning, possibly older than the current shape of the world itself, possibly survivors of a previous version of reality that ended before this one ever began. They are intelligent. They are connected to each other across vast distances, sharing a single vast, slow awareness. The Argonians who live among them are bound to them in the deepest possible way, drinking their sap as hatchlings, receiving their very souls from the trees, communicating with them through dreams and visions that no outsider can fully share. The Hist can grant knowledge. The Hist can alter bodies. And, most chilling of all, the Hist can guide and perhaps even control those who consume enough of their sap. There are tribes of Argonians who are said to act directly upon the will of the Hist, moving as one toward purposes that no one outside their kind has ever fully understood. So, if that glowing purple tree west of Whiterun is truly a Hist, fallen from a floating island and rooted by pure accident in the cold north, then consider what that means. It means there is a fragment of one of the oldest and strangest forms of life in all the world, sitting quietly on the tundra, dripping a sap that alters minds and bodies, being harvested and sold as a recreational drug to people who have absolutely no idea what they are taking into themselves. It means a sliver of an ancient alien intelligence has been reduced to a cash crop, tapped like a sugar maple, by smugglers who care about nothing except that the sap keeps flowing and the coin keeps coming. There is something deeply unsettling in that. The idea that a thing this old and this strange and this potentially aware could simply fall out of the sky and be exploited for pocket money, its true nature unnoticed, its origin shrugged off as a local curiosity. And here is the honest heart of the mystery. Nobody knows which story is true, the volcanic chunk of a dying mountain or the fallen spore of an ancient sentient tree. The lore gives you both and refuses to choose. The merchant who tells you the legends does not know herself. The giants who guard the tree cannot say. And so the sleeping tree keeps its secret, glowing softly in its misty pool, dripping its strange sap into bottles bound for distant hands, a fragment of somewhere else lodged in the soil of Skyrim, neither fully understood nor fully ignored, neither explained nor explained away. Let the purple glow soften at the edge of your thoughts. There is no harm in this tree, not really. Only a question, dripping slowly, one drop at a time, into the dark. The realm of forgotten souls. I want to take you now to one of the saddest places in all of existence, and I promise you, it is not a frightening one, only a melancholy one. The kind of melancholy that is somehow restful to sit with at this late, quiet hour. We are going to step out of the mortal world entirely, through a portal hidden in the depths of an old vampire castle, into a realm that exists somewhere between life and death. We are going to the soul cairn. The first thing you notice is the color. Everything here is washed in a deep, bruised purple, the light of no sun, because there is no sun. Overhead there is only a single pale moon, and a vast circular void of absolute blackness. A hole in the sky of this place darker than any night you have ever known. Lightning flickers constantly across the distant horizon, silent and slow. The ground is barren and cracked, scattered with dead trees and strange crystalline structures and odd upright stones. And growing here and there are pale clusters of something called soul husks, the only thing that passes for plant life in a land where nothing truly lives. And drifting across this desolate ground, in their hundreds and their thousands, are the souls. That is what the soul cairn is. It is where the trapped souls of the dead go to spend eternity. To understand the horror of that, you have to understand how they came to be here. In Skyrim, mages use soul gems to power their enchantments, trapping the soul of a slain creature inside a crystal, and burning that soul as fuel to bind magic into a weapon or a piece of armor. For ordinary creatures, the beasts of the wild, this is grim but accepted, a normal part of the craft. But there are black soul gems, and black soul gems can trap the souls of thinking, feeling sapient beings, people. And when a person's soul is caught in a black soul gem, and that gem is used to power an enchantment, the soul is not destroyed in the burning. It is sent here, to the soul cairn, to wander this purple wasteland for eternity, with no way out and no end to look forward to. Walk among the lost souls, and they will speak to you. And what they say is some of the most quietly devastating writing in all of Skyrim. They are confused. They are frightened. They do not understand where they are or how they came to be here. They murmur about how desolate the place is, how cold, how endless. And the cruelest part, the part that should make every mage who ever casually used a soul gem stop and feel genuinely sick, is this. Over time, the souls forget. They lose all memory of who they were, of the lives they lived, of the people who loved them. Only the newcomers still carry faint wisps of their former selves. The rest have been here so long that they have become nothing but their own loneliness, ghosts who have forgotten they were ever anything else at all. Every enchanted weapon you have ever held, every glowing blade, may have been paid for with someone's whole eternity here. It is a thought that turns the convenient, everyday business of enchantment into something very close to a quiet atrocity. And who rules this place? Not one of the dark gods, not one of the great demonic princes who own the other realms beyond the world. The soul cairn answers to something else, something the lore keeps almost entirely hidden. beings who call themselves the ideal masters. Nobody knows what the ideal masters actually are. They are not like the gods. They are not like the demons. They are not like anything else in all of creation. You never see them, not really. They speak sometimes through strange crystalline structures scattered across the realm. Voices without bodies. Presences without form. The clearest theory is that the ideal masters collect souls because they feed on them, that the endless harvest of the trapped dead is simply sustenance to these entities. And there is a darker theory still, that the souls are not food, but currency, that the ideal masters are gathering them to trade with some even higher power, some force further up the great chain of being than even they are, for purposes that no mortal mind could ever begin to grasp. What we do know is that they are deceivers. Necromancers, hungry for power, come to the soul cairn to bargain with the ideal masters, offering souls in exchange for the ability to raise and command the dead. And the ideal masters take their offerings, grant their power, and then, more often than not, trick the necromancer into a deal that leaves them trapped here too. Just another soul wandering the purple waste, just another item in the collection. The ideal masters describe their realm with what might be sincerity or might be the cruelest irony imaginable, as a refuge dedicated to peace and rest and harmony, as though eternal forgetting in a lightless waste were a gift, as though they were saving these souls from the meaningless hardship of being alive. But amid all this sorrow, the soul cairn holds one small and unexpectedly tender story, and I want to leave you with it, because it is the gentlest thing in this whole gray realm. Somewhere out in the waste, you may come across a single soul who is not like the others. He is not confused about who he was. He is not drifting. He is searching. He is calling out, over and over, a single name. He is looking for his horse. The horse's name is Arvak. This lost soul, in life, had a horse he loved, a horse named Arvak, and both of them ended up trapped here in the soul cairn, and they were separated, and now this soul wanders the purple dark, calling for the animal he cannot find. And if you choose to help him, if you search the desolate ground until you find Arvak's bleached and lonely skull, you can reunite them. You can learn to call Arvak yourself, and from then on, anywhere in the living world, you can summon him, a spectral skeletal horse wreathed in soft purple light, who comes when you call, and who can never truly die, because the worst has already happened to him. He is already dead. He has already been to the place the dead go. And now he carries you faithfully through the living world, glowing gently in the night, a kindness pulled out of the saddest realm in all of creation. We know almost nothing else about Arvak. His full story is a blank. His life before the soul cairn, a mystery the lore never fills in. But there is something perfect about him precisely because we do not know. A nameless soul, looking for his lost companion in a land of forgetting, and a stranger who stops to help them find each other again. In a realm built entirely on exploitation and loneliness and the slow erasure of everything a person ever was, one soul still remembered the name of someone he loved and would not stop calling it. And that, somehow, was enough. Hold on to that as the purple light fades. Even in the place where souls go to be forgotten, love was the last thing to go. The dragon that cannot die. We have spoken of two dragons in passing tonight, and now it is time to give them their due, because both are tangled in riddles, and one carries a curse so cruel and so quiet that it has stayed with me ever since I first learned of it. Let us begin in the dark, back in the soul cairn, where we just left the lost souls drifting under their void of black sky. Because there is something else here, something the trapped souls whisper warnings about. Beware the dragon, they say. Destroyer of souls, harbinger of the fallen, and out across the desolate ground you will find him. An undead dragon, his flesh rotted and gray-green and dripping, his wings tattered and weathered, flies drifting around his decaying body. His name is Durnavir, and in the dragon tongue that name means, with terrible precision, curse never dying. His story is one of the most genuinely tragic in all of Skyrim, and what makes it so is that it is a tragedy of trickery, a clever cruelty dressed up as a fair bargain. Durnavir was once a living dragon, back in the deep mythic age when dragons ruled the skies of the world and warred among themselves for dominance. But Durnavir was not like the others. While his kin fought their endless battles for control of the heavens, he turned instead to a darker art. He took up necromancy, the magic of death and the raising of the dead, an unusual pursuit for a creature as proud as a dragon. And his hunger for that power led him eventually to the same beings we just finished speaking of, the ideal masters. He went to them seeking the power to raise great armies of the undead, to summon legions of the dead, to serve him and secure his dominance. And the ideal masters, being precisely what they are, made him an offer. They would grant him exactly the power he craved, the ability to call up the dead at will. In exchange, he had only to serve as a guardian of the soul cairn, watching over a particular prisoner, a vampire named Valerica, whom they had trapped within their realm. He had only to guard her until she died. That was the whole of the bargain. Power beyond his dreams, in exchange for keeping watch until one mortal woman passed away. To an immortal dragon who measures time in ages, what was the death of a single mortal? A trivial thing, a short errand, he agreed. But the ideal masters had not told him one crucial detail, and it is the detail on which his entire eternity now hangs. Valerica was not mortal. She was a vampire, one of the deathless kind, a being who would never die of age, never sicken, never fade. She would simply go on and on and on, forever. Which meant that Durnavir's task, to guard her until her death, was a task that could never, ever be completed. He had agreed to serve the ideal masters until the end of someone who would never end. He had signed himself into an eternity of service, and he did not realize it until the trap had already closed, and it grew worse. As the long ages passed in that lightless realm, Durnavir's body began to change, to adapt to the soul cairn, to take on its death and its decay. He became undead, his living flesh rotting into the gray ruin you find him in now, his soul knitting itself so tightly into the fabric of that realm that even if his prisoner somehow died, even if he were somehow freed from his oath, he could never truly leave the soul cairn permanently. He had become part of it. To set foot in the living world again, for any length of time, would destroy him. He had traded his sky, his freedom, and his very life for a power he barely got to use, deceived by an impossible contract he never understood. When you finally meet him and defeat him, something unexpected happens. He does not stay dead, because the ideal masters protect him, and he rematerializes, and rather than rage, he honors you. He names you his vanquisher, and he asks you for one small mercy. He asks you to learn to summon him, so that now and then, for a few brief moments, you can call him out of the soul cairn and into the open skies of the living world, so he can feel the wind and see the world he lost, just for a little while, before he is pulled back down into the dark. There was a time, he says, when he called the world his home, but those days are long since past. It is one of the most quietly heartbreaking things a creature in this world will ever say to you, an immortal being, cursed into a death that never ends, asking only to borrow the sky for a moment at a time. And then there is the other dragon, the one we left waiting in the glowing dark of Blackreach, Volthurial. His mystery is of a different kind, because where Durnavir's tragedy is fully told, Volthurial's story is barely told at all. He simply exists, deep beneath the world, in the great cavern lit by its false sun. A dragon, a creature whose entire nature is to soar through open air, somehow trapped beneath the entire crushing weight of Skyrim's mountains, in a place where there is no sky to fly through, only a hanging orb of artificial light. How did he get there? Why does he stay? What is his connection to the Dwemer who built the cavern around him? The lore does not say. None of it is explained. And the way you summon him only deepens the strangeness, because to call Volthurial out of hiding, you must stand in the silent ruins beneath that false sun and shout at the orb in the dragon tongue, raising your voice against the captured star. Only then does he descend out of the gloom to face you, a creature of the sky, beneath the earth, a captured sun, and a dragon who answers when you shout at it. The Dwemer left no records to explain it, and the dragons themselves keep their silence. Volthurial is, in the end, one of those mysteries the world simply places in front of you and then declines to discuss, a riddle hanging in the perpetual twilight, as patient and as quiet as everything else in that buried country. Two dragons, then, in two kinds of darkness. One, cursed into endless guardianship by a bargain he never understood, asking only to taste the sky between his duties. and one trapped beneath the world for reasons no one will ever explain, waiting in the glow for someone to call his name. Let them rest in your thoughts for a moment, these great sorrowful creatures of the deep, and let yourself rest with them. The wound in time, high above everything, above the holds and the cities and the ruins and the ancient roads, above the tree line and the snow line and the clouds themselves, at the very summit of the highest mountain in all of the world, something is wrong with time. It has been wrong for thousands of years, and most people have never noticed, because you have to climb very high and stand very still and understand exactly what you are looking at before the wrongness becomes visible. But it is there, a scar in the fabric of things, a place where the past and present and future thin against one another and occasionally bleed through. The ancient Nords who made it called it the Tid Aran, the time wound. And the story of how it came to be there is one of the most extraordinary acts of desperate ingenuity in all of Skyrim's history. In the deep mythic age, when dragons ruled the world and men were their servants, there came a point where men had finally had enough. The dragon war had been raging, the humans slowly winning back their freedom, teaching themselves to shout, learning to meet their dragon overlords as something like equals on the field of battle. And at last, at the end of that long, bloody conflict, it came down to one dragon, Alduin, the World Eater. The firstborn, the great dragon of the end of Thieves, who was not merely a tyrant but something older and stranger and harder to understand, a being whose very cosmic purpose was to consume reality at the close of each great cycle. 3 Nord heroes, Gormlaith Goldenhilt, Hakon One-Eye, and Feldir the Old, stood against Alduin at the summit of the throat of the world. They had a weapon the dragons did not expect, a shout made entirely by mortals, the first shout ever created by human hands and human voices rather than gifted by draconic nature. They called it Dragon Rend, and its power was this. It forced into the dragon's mind, for a moment, the concept of mortality, the understanding of what it means to have an end. Dragons do not naturally comprehend this. They are eternal, and the idea of not being is alien to them. Dragon Rend made it real in Alduin's mind, briefly and terribly. And in that moment of confusion and anguish, he could not fly, could not sustain himself, and he fell. But even Dragon Rend was not enough to kill him. The World Eater, grounded and injured, was still the World Eater, and they could not finish him. And so Feldir the Old did something desperate and enormous, and perhaps irresponsible, though no one can really blame him for it given the circumstances. He used an Elder Scroll. An Elder Scroll is one of the most dangerous artifacts in existence, a document that exists outside of normal time and causality, that records things that have not happened yet, alongside things that happened long ago, and that can, in the hands of someone willing to pay the terrible price, be used to perform acts of reality bending. The cost of reading one unprepared is blindness, or madness, or both. The cost of reading one with intent is hard to predict. What Feldir intended was to banish Alduin from that moment entirely, to cast him forward into time, to throw him out of the present and into the future, buying the world the time it needed to survive. And it worked. Alduin was torn from that summit and flung forward through time, displaced into the future, gone from that age entirely. But time is not a substance you can simply bend without consequence. The Elder Scroll's use tore a wound in the fabric of the moment, a permanent abnormality at the summit of the throat of the world, where the shout echoed, and the banishment happened, and the forces invoked were simply too large to pass without leaving a mark. That wound is still there today, thousands of years later. Time at the summit of the mountain behaves strangely, pooling and eddying in ways it does not anywhere else in the world. The snow at the peak, they say, carries magical properties because of it. The cold is not simply weather, but something more fundamental, a residue of the rupture. And here is the haunting part, the detail that should make you pause. Alduin did not die when he was banished. He was simply displaced. He was thrown forward into the future, and the future, eventually, becomes the present. He emerged from that same time wound in the opening moments of the events you experience in Skyrim. He came back out of the scar in time exactly where he had been thrown into it, at the summit of the throat of the world, and from there he began his work of resurrecting the old dragons, rebuilding his army, picking up his purpose exactly where it had been interrupted all those thousands of years ago. The time wound that Feldir made to save the world is the very crack through which Alduin returned to threaten it again. The solution and the problem are the same wound. And one more layer still, the knowledge of how to fight Alduin, the shout Dragonrend that his creators took with them when they died, is not entirely lost. It is preserved in the time wound itself, echoing in that strange pooled past. If you stand at the summit with the Elder Scroll that was used to make the wound, and you read it there, you can look into that captured past and witness the original battle and learn the shout from the people who made it. You can reach back through the scar in time and take knowledge from the dead. It is an act so extraordinary, so elegantly strange, that it is easy to forget how completely bizarre it truly is. That the mountain keeps its old battle still echoing in the rock, that the past is accessible to those who know how to look, that time at the roof of the world does not quite flow the way it does everywhere else. Sitting just below that summit, in his monastery called High Hrothgar, is Parthernax, the old dragon who taught humanity to shout and who has spent thousands of years atoning for his earlier service to Alduin. He chose that place deliberately. He chose to meditate on the very wound he helped create, the scar left by the banishment he helped engineer. He has been there long enough that the question of what to do with someone like him, someone who committed terrible acts and then spent an eternity in quiet penance, is one of the most genuinely difficult moral questions Skyrim ever asks you to sit with. The Blades want him dead, the Greybeards want him protected, and the time wound in the rock behind him just keeps bleeding the past into the present, keeping the old battle alive, never quite healed, never quite finished. Rest with that one. High up and cold and strange, where time pools in the rocks and the old dead keep their echoes, and the roof of the world holds a question that nobody has ever fully answered. The liar who tells the truth. After so much sorrow in the dark, let us come up into the daylight for a while, onto the open roads of Skyrim, and let us meet the single strangest character you will ever encounter in all your travels. He is not a god. He is not a monster. He is not a ghost or a dragon or a lost soul. He is, by every appearance, an ordinary, wandering Khajiit merchant in plain monk's robes, carrying a few bottles of skooma, strolling the wilderness with nowhere in particular to be. His name is Mike the Liar, and he might just be the most quietly impossible being in the entire world. You meet him by chance. He turns up on a road somewhere, in a field, on the edge of a town, never in the same place twice, and if you speak to him, he will share his thoughts with you. He claims great knowledge. He says he knows many things that others do not. And then he proceeds to tell you a string of statements that range from the nonsensical to the suspiciously insightful, and you are never entirely sure which is which. He will comment on the strangest things, on horses, on werewolves, on why there are no multiplayer options in this world, on whether dragons truly exist or whether they are merely invisible. He talks for a little while, and then he grows tired, and tells you to go bother someone else, and wanders off again. And that is the whole of it. No quest, no reward. Just an odd cat in robes, full of half-truths and riddles, met on a lonely road and gone again. But Mike is not what he appears to be, and the more you learn about him, the more the ground shifts beneath you. The first strange thing is that Mike is not new. He has been wandering the lands of this world for a very long time indeed. Travelers met a Mike the Liar generations ago, in distant provinces, in earlier ages, long before the events in Skyrim. And the Khajiit, by their nature, do not live anywhere near long enough to account for that span of time. So how is the same peculiar character still walking the roads, full of the same riddles, after all this time? When you ask him about it, his answer is a small masterpiece of evasion. His father, he tells you, was also named Ma'ik, as was his father's father. At least, that is what his father said, and so the question dissolves in your hands. Is this a different Maiku, the latest in a long line of fathers and sons, all bearing the same name and somehow all finding themselves on the same strange roads, making the same strange observations? Or is it somehow the same Mike, impossibly old, telling a convenient little lie about ancestry to explain away his own endless life? He will not tell you, because telling you plainly is the one thing Mike never does. Now, I want to give you the honest grounding of who Mike really is, because it is charming in its own right and worth knowing. Mike was created by the developers as a kind of inside joke, a character who breaks through the wall of the story to comment on the game itself, on the choices made in building it, on the things fans asked for that did not make it in, on the little quirks and arguments of the community around it. His very name is a quiet tribute. He is named after one of the programmers who worked on an earlier game in the series, a man who was caught telling a few small fibs during development, and so the team immortalized him as a lovable liar, wandering the world forever. When Mike says something that sounds like nonsense, he is often winking at the people who made the game and the people who play it, making a joke that exists in the space between the character and the creators. He has appeared in several games across the Elder Scrolls series, each time in a different province, each time the same and yet slightly different, each time claiming descent from the last. But here is where it becomes genuinely fascinating, and here I have to be very clear with you that we are leaving solid ground and stepping into pure fan theory, the kind of speculation that the games themselves do not confirm. Because there is a concept in the deepest and most esoteric lore of this world, a state of being so rare and so profound that it is said almost no mortal has ever achieved it. It is a state of complete and total awareness. The recognition, by a being living inside the world, that the world is, in some sense, a dream, a creation, a thing that can be perceived from outside and even shaped from within. Those who reach this state are said to gain a kind of godhood, a mastery over reality itself, the ability to bend the rules of existence because they have understood, fully and without going mad, what existence actually is. And some have wondered, quietly, in the long arguments that fans have over campfires and in forgotten corners of the internet, whether Mike the liar might be one of these enlightened beings. Consider it. He is aware of things he should not be aware of. He comments on the nature of his own world, as though he can see it from the outside. He speaks of features and choices and decisions, as if he knows that his reality is a constructed thing. He persists across ages and provinces, unbothered by death, vague about his own origin, always smiling, always slipping away before you can pin him down. If any character in all of this world had achieved that impossible state of total awareness, the theory goes, would they not behave exactly like Mike? Wandering freely, immune to consequence, half joking, half prophetic, telling truths disguised as lies because the full truth is too large to say plainly? I cannot tell you that this is true. Nobody can. It is a theory, beloved and unprovable, and Mike himself would surely lie about it if you asked him directly. That is the perfect, maddening beauty of him. He is a liar, by his own name and his own admission, which means that nothing he says can be trusted, which means, paradoxically, that anything he says could be true. He occupies a space where falsehood and truth blur into each other completely, where every joke might be a revelation and every revelation might be a joke. He knows much, he says, and tells some. He knows many things others do not. And then he tells you he is tired and walks away down the road. And the riddle of what he actually is walks away with him, never to be solved, because solving it was never the point. The point was simply to meet him and to be left, smiling and uncertain, wondering. Let that uncertainty be a soft one. There is something comforting in a mystery that wants only to be enjoyed and never answered. Somewhere out there, on a road in the dark, the liar is still walking, still smiling, still keeping the one secret that might be everything or might be nothing at all, the champion's unwritten end. And so, we come to the last mystery of the night, and it is, fittingly, the one closest to home. Because for all the riddles we have wandered through tonight, the disappeared elves and the buried suns and the cursed dragons and the liar on the road, there is one question that the whole of Skyrim is built around, and yet never answers. What happens, in the end, to you? To the Dragonborn, the last Dragonborn, the one with the soul of a dragon and the body of a mortal, born once in a generation or once in an age into a moment of crisis to do what no one else can do. You arrive in this world a prisoner, bound and nameless, and you leave it, if the great deeds are done, as the savior of the world, the slayer of the world eater, the one who climbed into the realm of the honored dead and broke the great black dragon that meant to devour everything. You become the most powerful mortal of your entire age. And then the story simply stops, and the world goes quiet, and no one ever tells you what becomes of you afterward. This is not an accident. It is one of the most deliberate silences in all of the lore, And to understand why it matters, you have to understand that other great heroes of this world were not granted such silence. The champions of earlier ages have their fates recorded, more or less. We know what became of them, how their stories ended, where their roads finally led. But the last Dragonborn vanishes from the record entirely. After the saving of the world, after the dragon is put down and the final great deed is done, there is nothing. No tomb we can visit, no final tale, no account of old age, or peaceful death, or apotheosis, or anything at all. The most powerful being of the Fourth Era simply walks off the edge of what is written and is never heard from again. And yet there is one thread, one unsettling and tantalizing thread, that the lore leaves dangling, and it has fueled more quiet dread among those who love this world than almost anything else. It comes from the journey to the frozen island far to the north, and from the dealings there with the great dark god of forbidden knowledge. That god dwells in an endless library beyond the world, a realm of black water and grasping tentacles and infinite books, where every secret that has ever been written, and many that have not yet been written, are kept. He is the keeper of all knowledge and the master of fate, and he does not rule through obvious terror the way the other dark gods do. He rules through temptation. He offers exactly what the curious and the learned crave most of all: more knowledge, forbidden knowledge, power beyond what any book in the mortal world could grant. And the price, always, is service. He collects scholars and mages the way a child collects pretty stones, drawing them in with the promise of answers, and then keeping them, binding them to his endless library forever, because by the time they realize the trap has closed, they are already too deep in his debt to escape. The first Dragonborn, the very first to ever bear that power, an ancient and arrogant figure who lived in the age of the dragon cults, made exactly this bargain. He sought out the dark god of knowledge, became his champion, and was kept by him, trapped in that endless library for thousands of years, unable to return to the world, plotting and waiting, and slowly losing himself among the infinite books. He was, in almost every way, a cautionary tale dressed as a man. And when you finally face him at the summit of the god's realm, at the very end of your dealings in that place, Miraak says something that stays with you. He says, "And so the first Dragonborn meets the last, at the summit of Apocrypha, no doubt just as Hermaeus Mora intended. As if your arrival there was never truly your own choice, but the closing of a pattern laid down long before you were born. And at the end of that encounter, after the first Dragonborn is finally put to rest, after the knowledge is gained and the deed is done, the dark god of knowledge turns his attention to you. He has lost his old champion. And he looks at you with the soul of a dragon and a mind already stained by everything you have read in his pages. And he makes it clear that he finds you very, very interesting. There are those who have noticed the change in you afterward, who can tell just by looking at you that you have been reading the black books, that the hooks are already in your mind. The implication hangs there, unspoken and enormous, that the lure of that endless library will call you back, that it is, perhaps, your fate. So what becomes of the last Dragonborn? Here the lore opens its hands and offers you nothing but possibilities, and lets you choose which one to believe. Perhaps you are free. Perhaps, having saved the world, you simply lay down the burden and live out a quiet and ordinary life, growing old in some corner of Skyrim, the great deeds fading into legend behind you, dying at last like anyone else, and passing into whatever rest your people believe in. Perhaps you become something more, an eternal champion, sleeping until the world needs you again. The way heroes in the oldest stories never truly die, but only wait. Or perhaps, and this is the interpretation that lingers longest in the dark, perhaps the library wins. Perhaps the call proves too strong, as it did for the first Dragonborn before you, and you are drawn back to that realm of black water and infinite books, and you spend eternity there, reading without end, a living book added to the collection, the last of your kind kept forever by the god of knowledge, in a place beyond the world. The truth is that nobody knows, and that the not knowing is the final gift the world gives you. It hands you the most powerful figure of the age, the one who held the whole world's fate, and then it refuses to write their ending, and in doing so, it leaves that ending to you. You may imagine it however you wish. You may give yourself the quiet retirement, or the eternal vigil, or the endless library, and no one can tell you that you are wrong, because the page is genuinely, deliberately blank. The last Dragonborn left no final record, only legends and questions, and walked off into a silence that has never once been broken. And maybe that is the most fitting end of all for a journey through a world this full of mysteries. That the greatest mystery, in the end, is the one you carry yourself. That after all the disappeared elves and the buried suns, the singing whales and the cursed dragons, the lyre on the road and the souls in the dark, the last unanswered question is simply what happens to the one telling the story, and that the answer is left gently and forever to you, the graybeards and the weight of silence. There is a monastery on the slopes of the throat of the world, halfway up the highest mountain in the world, called High Hrothgar. It is not warm there. The wind howls through its stone corridors, and the cold is absolute, and the gray stone walls hold no decoration, no comfort, nothing that might distract from the one task the people who live there have set themselves for the whole of their lives. The graybeards live there, and they do not speak, not because they have taken a vow against it in any ordinary sense, but because they are afraid of what happens when they do. The graybeards are the most powerful masters of the voice in the world, men who have devoted themselves so completely to the way of the voice, the philosophy of using the dragon tongue only in reverence and absolute necessity, that they have spent decades, or in some cases centuries, in near total silence. They communicate with gestures. They spend their days in meditation, listening to the wind, contemplating the nature of the thuum, the gift of the voice they carry inside them. And the reason for all of that silence, the reason they will not simply speak to one another or to visitors in ordinary conversation, is genuinely terrifying once you understand it. When the graybeards summon you to their mountain at the beginning of your journey, the sound of that summons is audible and physically felt across the entire province of Skyrim. Guards in cities 50 miles away pause and look up and comment on it. Jarls discuss what it might mean. Common folk feel it as a tremor in the air, a vibration in the chest, a sound too large to quite be heard. That was the graybeards simply calling your name, using the most restrained, most careful, most delicate shout they could manage. That was them being quiet. The words they use when they speak, even in ordinary dragon tongue, reshape reality around them. Not as a deliberate act of magic, but as an unavoidable consequence of what they have become. The dragon tongue is not, in this world, a way of describing things. It is a way of making them real. When a dragon speaks the word for fire, the fire does not follow from the word as separate event. The word is the fire, manifested through draconic utterance, reality condensed into sound. Mortals who learn to speak this way are doing something profoundly unnatural, bending the structure of the world with every syllable, using a gift that was never quite designed for human throats. The graybeards have used it for so long and so deeply that they carry it in every word they form, and a casual greeting in the dragon tongue from one of these ancient masters would carry enough reality-warping force to cause avalanches, shatter stone, or harm anyone standing nearby without any intent to harm at all. So they stay silent, and the silence is not a loss. It is a discipline, and it is a mercy, and it is perhaps the most spectacular demonstration of controlled power in all of Skyrim. Any fool can shout down a mountain. True mastery means choosing not to, even when you are capable, even when the power hums in you constantly and wants to find expression. The graybeards have transcended the need to prove themselves. They have understood something that most warriors never learn, that the greatest demonstration of strength is the restraint that keeps it still. And here is the mystery beneath the philosophy. How old are they? The graybeards who live in High Hrothgar today have been there for at least several decades that anyone can confirm, and the oldest accounts suggest their presence on that mountain stretches back far longer than that. Masters of the voice, the lore suggests, do not age the way ordinary mortals do. The deep meditation and discipline of the way of the voice does something to the body, slows the passage of time through a life, extends the span of years available in ways that are not quite explained and have no definitive upper limit. Not immortality, but something close enough that the practical difference is hard to name. They experience time differently than normal people, these silent old men on the mountain, dwelling in a place where time is already strange, because of the time wound, and their long perspective on events makes them seem, to anyone who manages to speak with them, almost detached from the urgency of the age. The leader of the Greybeards, when you arrive, is a man named Arngir, and he is old in a way that is difficult to quantify. He knows the history of the voice as personal memory, rather than book learning. He does not teach you so much as unlock things you already carry. And when the dragon Parthernax, who sits even higher up the mountain, speaks to you directly, and the shock waves ripple through the stone, and the snow cascades off the ledges, Arngir speaks to you in ordinary language, specifically to protect you, using the language of men rather than the dragon tongue, so that conversation does not accidentally hurt you. That accommodation, an ancient and incomprehensibly powerful being, choosing a lesser mode of expression out of consideration for someone fragile, is one of the most graceful things in all of Skyrim. The mystery of the Greybeards is not one mystery, but several layered inside one another. The mystery of how long they have actually been alive. The mystery of what their full extent of power would look like if any of them ever chose to use it completely. The mystery of what the way of the voice is truly for, whether the philosophy of silence is really about reverence, or whether it is instead a necessary cage around something too large to be safely loose in the world. And the mystery of what happens to a master of the voice when they finally die, whether that much absorbed power simply dissipates, or whether it goes somewhere, adds to something, completes a pattern no one has ever been able to see the shape of. High Hrothgar sits quiet tonight, as it does every night, as it has for all the nights anyone can remember. The wind moves through its corridors, the old men meditate, and the mountain holds its secrets the way it holds the snow, without effort, without intention, simply because that is what mountains do. Let the silence settle over you. There is nothing louder than a room where the most powerful people in the world have agreed not to speak. The Night Mother and the void she serves. Deep in the shadows of Skyrim, in a place you would not find unless you were already looking for it, a mummified woman sits in a coffin and gives orders. She has been dead for centuries. Her body does not decay. And through means that no one completely understands, she continues to communicate with the living, passing down contracts for murder through the only intermediary capable of hearing her voice, the Night Mother. And the organization she founded and continues to guide, the Dark Brotherhood, is one of the strangest religious institutions in all of Tamriel, because that is what the Dark Brotherhood is. It is not a guild, not a mercenary company, not simply a loose collection of killers who happen to wear black and avoid the authorities. It is a religion. A genuine, sincere, deeply held religion, and its theology is unlike anything else in the world, because the Dark Brotherhood does not worship a god in any conventional sense. They worship the void itself, the primordial nothing that existed before creation, and the force of entropy and ending that will exist after everything is gone. They call this force Sithis, and they believe with complete sincerity that by hastening death, by fulfilling the contracts that come to them through the Night Mother, they are serving a cosmic necessity, participating in the great cycle of creation and destruction that keeps the universe turning. Sithis is not a being you can speak to. It is not a being you can petition or propitiate or make deals with. It is, as near as the lore can describe it, the primal concept of not being, the absence that made the presence of all things possible, the void against which everything is defined. The Night Mother serves as the only intermediary between that void and the mortal world, channeling its will into the specific and actionable form of assassination contracts. She speaks, and the living hear, and knives are sharpened, and someone somewhere is found dead in the morning, and the void is served. The story of how the Night Mother came to occupy this strange role is one of the darkest origin stories in all of Skyrim. She was, in life, an unnamed woman, and the story goes that Sithis itself came to her, or a manifestation of Sithis came to her, and made her a terrible offer. If she would murder all 5 of her own children, she would become his bride, the progenitor of a new form of worship, the cornerstone of an organization built upon her sacrifice. Whether the story is literal history or symbolic mythology, passed down through generations of assassins, is deliberately unclear. What is clear is that she accepted, and that the 5 children died, and that the Dark Brotherhood was founded on those deaths, and that every contract the Brotherhood has ever fulfilled traces its spiritual lineage back to that act. Now she sits in her coffin, and the coffin travels with the Brotherhood, carried from sanctuary to sanctuary by her keeper, a figure of absolute devotion whose entire purpose is to protect her remains and to relay her words to those qualified to hear them. In Skyrim, her keeper is a man named Cicero, and his story is one of the most quietly devastating character studies in the whole game. Cicero was once a normal assassin, skilled and unremarkable, one among many in a Brotherhood chapter that was slowly dying. He watched the organization deteriorate. He watched members leave or be killed, one by one, until there was no one left but him and the Night Mother's silent coffin. And he kept his vigil. He maintained the rites and the rituals with no one to perform them for, no sanctuary to call home, no brotherhood left to belong to. He carried her alone, across the country, looking for the last surviving fragment of the organization he had given his life to, maintaining a faith with no congregation, speaking rites to an empty room, because that was his duty and he could not imagine laying it down. Years of that kind of isolation do something to a person. Cicero's journals, which you can find scattered through his travels, track the transformation from a professional assassin with dark humor and genuine skill into someone slowly unmade by loneliness and the weight of a calling that the rest of the world no longer shared. He became the jester, the eccentric, the performer, talking to a corpse because there was simply no one else left to talk to. His madness, if it is madness, is not the cackling kind. It is the specific kind that comes from meaning too much to something that does not speak back, from pouring devotion into a vessel that will never acknowledge it, from being the last believer in a faith the world has forgotten. And the mystery at the center of all of this is the obvious one, the one no one can fully answer. Is the Night Mother actually in there? Does whatever resides in that mummified body actually hear, actually communicate, actually transmit the will of something ancient and beyond? The information she provides, the contracts she passes down, the things she knows that she could not know if she were merely a preserved corpse, all of that suggests that something genuine is happening. But what exactly it is, whether it is the original woman's consciousness preserved beyond death, or a divine entity using her remains as a vessel, or something else entirely that we do not have good language for, remains one of the Brotherhood's most cherished and most terrifying unsolved questions. The practitioners of the Dark Sacrament, the ritual that reaches the Night Mother, and through her to Sithis, believe they are genuinely praying. They are using specific materials in specific ways, with a specific intent, and something hears them. Somewhere in the dark, something responds to that concentrated, desperate desire for death with efficient precision. Whether you find that comforting or horrifying probably says something about you. Tonight, in some cold room somewhere in Skyrim, someone is performing the Dark Sacrament, and in the darkness, something is listening. The amulet and the three brothers. There is an old story in Skyrim about an archmage and his three sons, and it is a story about what greed does to a family when the thing being coveted is powerful enough. The archmage was a man named Galder, and he lived in the early First Era, a time when the land was newly settled and the Nord civilization was still finding its shape. Galder was powerful and respected, a court wizard to the High King himself, and he possessed an amulet of extraordinary magical strength, an artifact that granted its wearer tremendous reserves of health and magical energy and physical endurance all at once. It was, by any measure, one of the most potent single items in the world, and Galder kept it carefully and used it well, and lived a long and distinguished life. But his three sons watched him, and they coveted what he had. Their names were Gyric, Sigdis, and Mikrul, and they were each in their own way accomplished, each capable of great things if they had simply chosen to pursue their own paths rather than fixate on their father's prize. Instead, they murdered him. They killed their own father for his amulet, and then, because none of the three could agree to let either of the other two hold such power alone, they broke it into 3 pieces, and each took one. What happened next came swiftly. The High King of the time, appalled by both the murder and the chaos the 3 brothers wreaked with their stolen fragments of the amulet, ordered the whole affair suppressed. Not just the brothers punished, but the entire story buried. Galder's name was struck from the records. The 3 sons were hunted down and entombed in separate ancient burial mounds across Skyrim, each sealed away with the fragment they had stolen, and the official history was rewritten to make the whole thing as if it had never happened. The conspiracy of silence was so thorough that by the time you arrive in Skyrim, almost no one has ever heard the name Galder at all. But their tombs still exist, and the brothers are still inside them, and they are not at peace. Thousands of years after the murder and the suppression and the sealing, the three Galder brothers are still hostile, still powerful, still defending their stolen fragment, as though the crime were fresh. They have become Draugr of tremendous strength, the kind that require real preparation to face, and each has been twisted by the long centuries of undeath into something specific and terrifying. Jurek can make himself invulnerable. Sigdis summons copies of himself to confuse his enemies. Mikrul commands an army of the Draugr dead. They are, in a very real sense, the physical manifestation of their father's murder, preserved in undeath, unable to rest, because the thing they did was never truly resolved. The mother or some curse worker intervened at some point, binding them to eternal restlessness as punishment for what they had done. The exact nature of the binding is not fully explained. What is explained is the consequence. They cannot move on. They cannot be at peace. They cannot leave the tombs where they were sealed. They simply wait, endlessly hostile, guarding the fragments of the thing they stole, until someone comes to take it from them. And when you finally defeat all three, and gather the three fragments and bring them together at the original tomb of Galder himself, something happens that the game handles quietly, but that carries enormous weight. You reassemble the amulet, and in doing so, you end something. Not just the practical quest, not just the magical outcome. You resolve a murder that was committed thousands of years ago, and then buried so thoroughly that history pretended it never happened. You give the whole sad story an ending. It was denied. The three brothers finally stop, because the pattern is completed, because the broken thing is whole again, because the crime that set everything in motion has, at last, been addressed. The Galder amulet is a genuinely powerful artifact when it is reassembled, one of the best items you can obtain in the early part of your journey in Skyrim. But what it actually is, underneath the practical function, is a family heirloom that was torn apart by greed and violence and has spent several thousand years waiting to be put back together. Every great piece of power in this world has a story like that, if you look closely enough. A story of the wanting and the taking and the cost that follows. The Galder amulet just makes the story more explicit than most, and buries it more carefully, and waits longer for someone to dig it back up. There are ancient Nordic burial mounds all over Skyrim that hold their secrets just as tightly, stories sealed inside stone and dark, and the patient hostility of the long dead. The Galder story is just one of them, but it is the one that reminds you most clearly that even the highest arts and the greatest powers in this world are entangled with the smallest and most ordinary human failures: jealousy, greed, the inability of three brothers to agree. These are the things that made the Galder conspiracy, and these are the things that the amulet, broken and then whole again, quietly commemorates: the false rebellion and the hidden hand. There is a document you can find, if you are careful and quick, during one of the most dangerous social engagements in all of Skyrim. In the middle of a party at the Thalmor embassy, the great compound of the elven supremacists who are quietly reshaping the politics of the entire continent, there are papers in a locked office that explain, in cold bureaucratic language, the true strategic goals of the Thalmor regarding the civil war that is tearing Skyrim apart. And what they say is so quietly devastating that most players rush past them without truly stopping to read. The civil war in Skyrim, from the Thalmor's perspective, is not a problem. It is an opportunity. It is, in fact, the ideal outcome of a long and patient manipulation, and the document names Ulfric Stormcloak specifically, the Nord rebel leader, the man who killed the High King and sparked the whole conflict. It classifies him as an asset, an unwitting one, which is in some ways the most chilling qualifier of all. Ulfric does not know he is serving the interests of the people he claims to oppose. He does not know he has been used. He has no idea that his passionate, sincere, deeply felt rebellion against Imperial and Thalmor domination is, in practical strategic terms, doing exactly what the Thalmor want. To understand why, you have to understand what the Thalmor actually want, at the level below the religious enforcement, and the cultural supremacy, and the political posturing. What they want is a weakened human civilization, a fractured empire, two great armies, the Stormcloaks and the Imperials, spending their gold and their soldiers and their years grinding against each other in a war neither side can cleanly win. Every battle that kills Stormcloak soldiers kills men who might otherwise fight the Thalmor. Every gold piece spent on the Civil War is a resource not available for resistance to Elven dominance. Every city burned, every field left unharvested, every road left unpatrolled because the guards are marching to war. All of it serves the Thalmor's long-term calculation. An exhausted, divided, war-torn Skyrim and Empire is easier to eventually overwhelm than a united, prosperous one. And here is the biographical detail that makes Ulfric's role in this so tragic and so uncomfortable. He was captured during the Great War, the earlier conflict between the Empire and the Thalmor, and during his captivity, he was questioned by Elven interrogators. He was, the document implies, broken by that questioning in some meaningful way, not necessarily physically, though that too perhaps, but strategically, made to provide information he did not fully understand the significance of. Since then, the Thalmor have taken care to subtly encourage his development as a figure of Nordic resistance, because a Ulfric who causes maximum internal chaos is more valuable to them than a Ulfric who succeeds. They do not want him to win. If Ulfric wins the Civil War and Skyrim becomes independent, a united Norse nation freed from imperial influence might actually be a serious military obstacle to Thalmor ambitions. But if the war drags on, if neither side ever achieves a decisive victory, if both sides bleed and exhaust themselves for years or decades, while the Thalmor consolidates power elsewhere, then the Elven supremacists emerge from the whole period in the strongest possible position. They support whichever side currently appears weaker, tipping the balance just enough to keep the stalemate alive. They want the conflict, and they want it to last. What makes this so genuinely haunting is how completely it sidesteps the moral debate that the Civil War presents to you as a player. You are asked throughout your time in Skyrim to choose a side in this conflict, and the game takes some care to present both positions as having real merit and real costs. The Empire has compromised its principles, but preserves a form of unity. The Stormcloaks fight for genuine freedom, but pursue it through ethnic exclusion and a chauvinist nationalism that brutalizes the people who share the land with them. Both sides have legitimate grievances and serious failures. Neither choice is clean, and the Thalmor embassy papers add a third layer beneath all of that. Because it turns out that regardless of which side you choose, regardless of which faction wins the war, the party that benefits most is the one not fighting it. You can fight for Nord independence and accidentally deliver exactly what Skyrim's most dangerous foreign enemy wanted. You can fight to preserve the Empire and spend yourself defending a compromise that was already a defeat. Or you can set the whole conflict aside to fight the dragon and the World Eater and come back to find the war still grinding away, accomplishing nothing except the steady depletion of the very civilization you saved. The documents in the Thalmor embassy are missable, easy to skip, hidden behind a locked door at a timed event where you have 100 other things to worry about. And in that hiddenness, there is a kind of dark joke, the most important political intelligence in all of Skyrim, tucked behind a routine security measure, available to anyone who bothers to look and invisible to everyone who does not. The world is like that, the lore seems to say. The real mechanisms are always in the back room. The visible conflict is always covering something older and colder and more patient than anything that has a name on a battlefield. Sleep on that one carefully. It is the kind of thought that tends to keep people awake if you hold it too tightly. The words carved in stone. There is a language older than any human tongue in Skyrim, older than the settlement of the land, older perhaps than the concept of language itself, and that language is carved into the walls of the ancient burial mounds and the faces of old standing stones throughout the province. The dragon tongue, Dova Zul, does not merely describe the world. In the hands of those who understand its true nature, it creates the world, reshapes it, imposes new patterns on reality through the act of vocalization alone. The word walls are not decorations. They are not the Nordic equivalent of graffiti or historical inscription. They are repositories of power, placed by people who understood exactly what they were putting in the stone. Think about what it means to carve a word of power into rock. You are not writing down a description of a concept. You are fixing a piece of reality into a medium that will last as long as the stone lasts, inscribing an actual fragment of the world's operating code into the permanent record. The ancient Nords who carved the word walls understood this, and the placement of those walls tells you something about the history they commemorate. Almost every word wall sits at a site of ancient battle, a place where Nords and dragons clashed in the Great War of the Merethic era. The word carved into the stone is the record of what was won there, the knowledge gained through that specific encounter with draconic power, preserved in a form that will last until the mountain crumbles. And the dragon buried nearby, or the hostile dead who guard the wall, are not coincidental. The dragon was the teacher, or the enemy, or the source of the knowledge, and its remains or its servants remain because the site itself is sacred in a way that goes beyond simple historical importance. It is a place where the fabric of reality was tested, and where something true was learned about the nature of power, and that truth is still in the stone, waiting. There are estimated to be dozens of these walls across Skyrim, and together they form a kind of hidden map of the ancient conflict, a geography of battles and learning, each site marking a moment where men proved they could meet dragons on something like equal terms. The Greybeards know where many of them are. The dragons, before they were hunted to extinction, knew where all of them were, and the last dragonborn, who can absorb the power in those carved words instantly, with an understanding that takes ordinary humans years of meditation to achieve, is effectively following a trail laid down in the deep mythic age by people who could not have known they were doing it. Here is the mystery embedded in the word walls, the question that the lore raises and does not answer cleanly. Why are some words missing? The dragon tongue is a complete language, and the shouts available to a master of the voice are numerous, but not all of them have word walls in Skyrim. Some were learned differently, passed down through instruction, or inherited from the dragonborn soul. And some, by the accounting of scholars who have mapped the known walls against the known vocabulary of Dovazul, simply seem to be absent, their walls either lost or destroyed, or never made in the first place. Did some battles produce no knowledge worth preserving? Did some knowledge get carved into walls that have since been swallowed by the earth, or buried under avalanche, or sunk into the sea? Or is there a third possibility, the unsettling one, that some words were deliberately withheld, some walls never carved because the Nords who won that knowledge decided it was better kept in silence than in stone? The Greybeards would know. But the Greybeards, as we discussed, do not speak, and the things they might tell you if they did would reshape the air around you, whether they intended it or not. And so the word walls remain, carved and patient, half their secrets already given to the right eyes and the right voice, and the rest waiting in the dark of the ruins for someone worthy to come and find them. The language is still there, the stone is still there. And if you stand very quietly in the cold of one of those ancient burial mounds, if you stop and look at the carved characters and think about the hands that put them there, and the battles that inspired them, and the world that was different when that was done, you can feel something of what the word walls are, the deliberate preservation of power by people who wanted to make sure it survived them. A love letter written in the language of reality, signed by the dead, addressed to whoever might be able to read it, the college and the light that should not be. There is something wrong with Winterhold, and anyone who arrives in the city for the first time can feel it before they can explain it. The city clings to the northeastern tip of Skyrim, on a narrow promontory above the frozen sea, and where you might expect a settlement of reasonable size given its position as a provincial capital, you find instead a ghost of a city, a handful of buildings, a Jarl's longhouse for a handful of courtiers, a single inn, streets that should have more life in them. The Nords of Winterhold speak of their city with a kind of reserved grief, the way people speak about a place that used to be something and is no longer, and has not been for a very long time. What happened to Winterhold is the Great Collapse, and the Great Collapse happened roughly 200 years before the events you experience in Skyrim. In the early years of the Fourth Era, enormous sections of the city fell into the sea. Not gradually, not over years of erosion and tide, but catastrophically, the ground simply giving way and taking buildings and streets and people with it. A disaster so sudden and so thorough that it left the city a fraction of its former self, and its surviving inhabitants, traumatized in ways that have calcified across generations into permanent suspicion and grief. The mystery is what caused it. And the obvious answer, the one the surviving Nords of Winterhold have believed for 200 years, is the college. Because the College of Winterhold did not fall into the sea. Through whatever combination of its own construction, its own enchantments, and its own deep magical foundations, the college survived the Great Collapse intact, sitting on its spire of rock above the ruined city like a judgment or a joke. The proximity is suggestive. The College of Mages sits right there, obviously powerful, obviously capable of extraordinary feats of construction and magic, and everything around it fell into the sea while it alone remained standing. Of course, the Nords blamed the mages. Of course, the relationship between the city and the college, already uneasy, curdled after the collapse into something close to open hostility that has never fully resolved. But here is the thing. There is no evidence that the college caused the Great Collapse, no documentation of a magical accident on that scale, no account from inside the college of an experiment gone catastrophically wrong at the right time. The most credible competing explanation ties the collapse to the Red Year, the catastrophic eruption of Red Mountain that devastated Morrowind, and to the broader geological and magical upheavals that followed from it. The sea that borders Winterhold is not ordinary sea. The north coast of Skyrim sits above fault lines and sub-oceanic instabilities that would not surprise any honest geologist, and a world-shaking volcanic event thousands of miles away might plausibly have sent tremors and sea changes that undermined the cliffs beneath Winterhold over the years that followed. The timing is not exact, but it is not impossible. The Nords of Winterhold have never accepted this explanation because accepting it would mean forgiving the college for something, and forgiving the college would mean giving up the story of the collapse that has organized their grief for 200 years. The mages did this. That story has the virtue of giving the disaster an agent, a face, a target for the anger that has nowhere else to go. The geological explanation gives them nothing but impersonal bad luck and the indifference of the earth. And so the tension sits, unresolved, across all of Skyrim's present day. The college sits on its spire. The half-empty city broods around it. The Jarl of Winterhold maintains a relationship with the college that is more obligation than affection, and the common folk of the city regard the mages with an unease that borders on open contempt. 200 years of blame that may be completely misplaced, calcified into something that functions as local culture. Inside the college, separated from all of this political and emotional history, there is another mystery, and this one lives in a specific room. Deep in the midden, the old sections beneath the college, there is a chamber, and in that chamber there is an orb, a glowing, floating orb of magical energy, hovering in the air, communicating in a thin and reedy voice with anyone willing to stop and listen. This is the Augur of Dunlane, and his story is one of the college's most carefully kept cautionary tales. The Augur was once a human student named Dunlane, a promising young mage who pushed beyond his understanding and suffered a consequence that can never be undone. He conducted an experiment of such reckless ambition that the resulting magical catastrophe did not merely injure him or kill him in any ordinary sense. It transformed him. His physical body was destroyed or transcended or subsumed, and what remains is pure magical energy, aware and communicating but permanently bound to that chamber, unable to leave, unable to return to any bodily form, unable to do anything except exist in that specific place, as something that is aware and capable of communication, but is no longer quite alive in any meaningful sense. He is, by his own account, a consequence of seeking power without wisdom. The college keeps him as a resource, a source of divination and deep magical knowledge that an entity of pure energy and expanded awareness can provide. But they also keep him as a warning, the most literal and undeniable possible proof that magical ambition without understanding can result in fates worse than death, not injury, transformation into something that is neither dead nor alive, bound to a single room forever, reduced to a voice and a glow, and the memory of having once been something more. And the Augur knows this. He is, by all accounts, entirely sane and entirely lucid about his situation. He does not rant or despair. He simply exists in that room and answers questions and provides insights and serves as the college's conscience when it is willing to listen, which is not always. During the crisis around the Eye of Magnus, when the college is in genuine danger and the staff and students are behaving with precisely the kind of reckless ambition that destroyed Dunlane. The augur does what the conscience of an institution always does. He warns them. He tells them clearly and directly that they are making the same mistake that made him what he is. And the people he tells continue anyway, because that is what people do. Because the warning of someone who was ruined by their own ambition is the warning that ambitious people always believe will not apply to them. There is one genuine Skyrim mystery bound up in the augur that the lore does not resolve. He says at one point that he has no memory of the moments leading up to his transformation. The last thing he remembers clearly is ordinary college life, ordinary study, ordinary days. And then there is a gap, and then there is the chamber, and the glow, and the voice, and the eternity. Whatever it was that Dunlane did to himself, whatever experiment was so far beyond his skill that it unmade him and remade him as something else, has been completely lost, not just from the historical record, but from his own memory of it. The most important moment of his existence is the one he cannot recall. And that particular shape of loss, the catastrophe that erases its own explanation, is one of the most quietly eerie things in the whole of the college's history. Rest in the glow of that old light for a moment. The augur waits in his chamber, patient and terrible and very, very alone, and the college goes on around him, and the city broods, and the mystery of what broke Winterhold is still, 200 years later, exactly as unresolved as it was the morning after it happened. The ghost who remembers the Emperor. On a lonely road through the Reach, in the foothills not far from the great mountain hold of Markarth, there is a small inn called Old Hroldan Inn, and here, at night, a ghost appears. He is not hostile. He does not moan or threaten or attempt to drive you away. He is simply there, an ancient Nord soldier in old armor, and he is looking for someone. He has been looking for a very long time. And the person he is looking for, the person whose name he calls across the centuries, is Halti, a name you might recognize if you know a certain piece of history. Halti Earlybeard, the childhood name of the man who would become Tiber Septim. Tiber Septim, for those who need a brief grounding in the scale of this, is the single most significant figure in the political history of the Elder Scrolls world. He was the warlord who united the fractured continent of Tamriel under a single empire, conquering every hold and every province through a combination of military genius, strategic ruthlessness, and the tremendous personal power that came from being, by many accounts, a dragonborn himself. He used a great mechanical god at one point. He fought campaigns across decades. He became, after his death, the god Talos, the ninth divine, whose worship was so important to the Nord people that its prohibition by treaty triggered the civil war you arrive to find in progress. Whether Tiber Septim actually ascended to divinity, or whether that story is a human invention to make a beloved emperor into something immortal, is one of the most contested theological questions in the whole world. But none of that concerns the ghost at Old Hroldan Inn, because the ghost at Old Hroldan Inn knew Tiber Septim when he was just Hjalti, when he was a young man fighting to take the Reach, when he was a soldier, when the greatness was potential rather than history. The ghost, whose name was Valdguf, served alongside him in that early campaign, and the ghost has been waiting in that inn ever since, because this is where they made a promise to one another, or perhaps just because this is where Valdguf died, and he has not been able to move on. He is waiting for Hjalti to come back. He has been waiting for centuries. And here is the mystery. When the Dragonborn walks into Old Hroldan Inn, Valdguf looks at them and sees Hjalti. Not literally, presumably, because the Dragonborn is clearly not the same person as a man who lived and conquered and died over 200 years ago. But he responds to them as though Hjalti were there, asking for help with the sword that he never retrieved, asking the Dragonborn to finish the business that was left unfinished the day Valdguf died. And if the Dragonborn plays along, finds the sword, returns it to him, the ghost is satisfied and passes on. So what is the ghost responding to? The most widely held theory is that it has to do with the nature of the Dragonborn soul itself. Tiber Septim was, by most serious accounts, a Dragonborn, possessed of the same soul fire that you carry, the same draconic essence. And the dragon soul, if the lore around it is taken seriously, is not quite the same as an ordinary human soul in the way it relates to the patterns of the world. When Valdguf's ghost looks at the Dragonborn, it may be feeling the echo of a Dragonborn soul, the same quality he felt in Hjalti all those centuries ago, and responding to it as if to the person it belonged to. Not recognizing a face or a name, but recognizing something deeper, the particular resonance of a being with a dragon's soul in a human body. If that theory holds, then the ghost at Old Holden Inn is not simply a sad relic of a man who could not let go. He is a piece of evidence. Evidence that the dragonborn soul is distinctive in a way that transcends individual identity, that there is something in it that can be felt across the centuries and mistaken for continuity, that what Valdguf senses when the dragonborn walks in is not the same man but the same kind of man, the same ancient and peculiar fire, dressed in a different body, walking through a world that is very different from the one Hjalti walked through. It is a quiet mystery in a game full of loud ones. No great artifact, no cosmic stakes. Just an old ghost, a name spoken into the dark, and a question about what it means to carry a particular kind of soul through history. Whether Valdguf is right to see what he sees when he looks at you, whether you and Hjalti are in some meaningful sense the same thing or merely similar things, is never answered. The game gives you the ghost and the task, and the quiet resolution of watching him finally move on. And it leaves the deeper question to you to sit with, which is, perhaps, the right way to handle it. Some mysteries are too personal to resolve from the outside. Some questions about identity and continuity, and the long persistence of certain kinds of fire in the world, are questions that you have to carry yourself and answer, or not answer, in your own time. The ghost is gone now. He found what he needed, and he left. And the question he left behind in the quiet of that little inn is still here, drifting in the lamplight, waiting for someone willing to sit with it a while. What the silence means. We have covered a great deal of ground tonight, and before we let the fire go all the way down, I want to say one last thing about the nature of these mysteries, because there is a pattern in them that I find genuinely comforting and that I think is worth naming out loud. Every mystery we have visited tonight shares a common quality. It is not just that the answer is missing, it is that the absence of the answer is clearly intentional, clearly chosen, clearly a design decision made by the people who built this world. The bones in Kagranzel were placed there to be unexplained. The identity of the headless horseman was withheld on purpose. The fate of the last dragonborn ends on a blank page that was left blank deliberately. Even the great collapse of Winterhold, which has a plausible natural explanation right there in the lore, was constructed so that the natural explanation is never confirmed, so that the blame and the doubt and the unresolved grief of the city remain alive. A world that answers all its own questions is a smaller world. It is tidier and more comfortable, but it does not breathe the way a world breathes, that still has things in it no one can account for. Every mystery we wandered through tonight is a place in the world that is bigger than the map, a door that stays locked not because the key was lost, but because the locked door is itself the point, the invitation to imagine, to theorize, to sit in the dark and wonder. The Dwemer might be gods now, the bones might be whales, the headless horseman might be Ragnar, the last dragonborn might be free. These might be true, none of them might be true. And the space between the might be and the never will know is where the world breathes, and where the imagination lives, and where, at this hour, on a quiet night with the snow still falling, you can rest most easily. The world is large. The dark is full, and not knowing is not the same as being lost. It is, at this hour, simply the most natural state there is. The fire does not know where it goes when it goes out. The snow does not know where it falls from, and yet both of them are exactly what they should be, doing exactly what they were meant to do, right up until the very last moment. So rest now, traveler. The fire has burned down to its last soft embers, and the snow is still falling outside, slow and quiet and endless, the way it always does in the far north. We have wandered a long way tonight, through the deepest and strangest corners of a world that loves to keep its secrets, and we have left almost every one of them unsolved, exactly as it should be. Some questions are not meant to be answered. Some are meant only to be held, lightly, in the dark, until they soften into dreams. If these stories carried you somewhere peaceful tonight, if they quieted the noise in your head even a little and helped you drift towards sleep, then do me one small kindness before you go. Leave a like so these tales find their way to others who need a calm voice in the dark, and subscribe so the next long night of mysteries comes to you when the world feels loud and you need somewhere quiet to rest. I will be here, by the fire, with more stories from the cold and the deep, and the half-remembered places of the world, whenever you are ready to wander again. For now, though, there is nothing left to do, and nowhere left to be. Lower your head, let your breathing slow, let the embers fade, and let the mysteries keep until morning. Sleep well, traveler, sleep well.